Hi guys, and welcome to Boring History Relaxing. Tonight we step into a scene that feels almost impossible, a medieval village under the weight of its coldest winter. Snow piled high against crooked timber frames, frost creeping over every exposed surface, and the wind singing a sharp, eerie tune through the narrow streets. You trudge across frozen ground, boots crunching in the brittle snow, and you wonder how anyone could have survived in these conditions, without firewood stacked in every corner, without modern heating, without even a hint of the central warmth you take for granted today. You probably won't survive this. The cold bites through your layers, the tips of your fingers tingling with numbness, and you notice the way the smoke of distant chimneys curls in reluctant spirals, not enough to pierce the bone-deep chill. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you do that, let me know where you are and what your local time is. It feels strangely grounding to imagine your location as we wander these medieval streets together. The village is quiet, but it is a living quiet, one that hums with the subtle noises of survival. You hear the faint scrape of a sled dragged along ice-crusted paths, the low hum of conversation carried from one timbered doorway to another, and the soft thump of someone adjusting a heavy door to keep a draft at bay. Inhabitants move carefully, conserving energy, aware that every unnecessary step costs precious warmth. Even the animals seem attuned to the cold chickens huddling corners of coops, their beaks tucked under feathers, while goats and pigs cluster against walls, seeking the tiniest patch of shelter from the wind. Historians still argue whether the animals were primarily a source of heat, or simply tolerated the cold because there was no alternative. You notice the way a dog pads silently beside a child, tail flicking in measured balance, its body a living radiator against the frozen world. You step closer to a house made of rough-hewn stone, and the temperature difference is immediately noticeable. The walls are thick, windows small and often shuttered, and the thatched roof above muffles the whistle of the wind. The interior smells of wood smoke, straw, and the faint tang of animals. A mainstream historical fact is that these houses were designed to trap heat as efficiently as possible. But you can see the challenges even in the design gaps between stones are stuffed with moss or clay. But air still finds its way in, curling around corners and sending sudden shivers along your spine. You peer at the hearth, where embers smoulder quietly. The heat is subtle, not like a roaring modern fire, but it is enough to chase some of the frost from your fingers. A quirky tidbit is that villagers sometimes covered embers with ash at night, allowing them to rekindle the next morning without searching endlessly for fresh kindling. The practice feels both clever and precarious, a delicate negotiation with the elements. You wander further, noting that families often sleep together on rush-strewn floors, piled with straw mattresses, furs, and whatever scraps of linen they could muster. Communal living serves both comfort and survival. Every body pressed close adds warmth. And while it may feel crowded by modern standards, you begin to understand the logic. Historians still debate exactly how effective these methods were, whether the layering of humans and textiles truly prevented frostbite, or whether it was more about morale and the illusion of safety. Even the positioning of the bed seems deliberate. Corners chosen to trap whatever residual warmth rises from cooking or body heat, almost like a silent choreography perfected over generations. Animals are an integral part of this equation. Goats, pigs, and sometimes even cows are brought inside during the harshest nights, not merely for warmth, but for protection against theft or predators. The smell of hay mingled with animal musk is pungent, yet oddly comforting, a sign that life continues despite adversity. A fringe theory suggests that animals were sometimes deliberately rotated between households so that everyone could benefit from the warmth of livestock, though whether this was widespread or occasional is uncertain. You brush your hand along the side of a sleeping goat, feeling the heat radiate outward in slow pulses. It is both physical warmth and a reassurance of continuity. Life persists even when the world is frozen solid. You notice the layering of clothing, each piece adding a buffer against cold air. Wool, linen, and fur combine in improvisational fashion, sometimes patched with older garments to extend their life. Scholars still argue whether medieval villagers had specific rules for layering, or if survival dictated spontaneous adaptation. A quirky tidbit emerges as you notice a small bundle wrapped in dried moss, perhaps an experimental insulation strategy. Though it looks uncomfortable and scratchy, you can almost feel the intention behind it, a human attempt to trick nature into providing more comfort than it was inclined to give. Some houses incorporate subterranean elements, like root cellars or small tunnels dug beneath floors. These spaces maintain steadier temperatures, cold but not biting, and are often used to store food and water. You slip into one briefly, the air damp and earthy, the stone walls muted and protective. Historians still argue whether these spaces were ever meant as emergency sleeping quarters or solely for storage. But you can see the logic. A stable microclimate offers relief from the chaotic frost above. As you make your way back toward the main cluster of homes, you notice sparks still glowing in the hearths of certain households. The main fire has been banked, coals smothered with ash, yet warmth lingers, and you realize that maintaining embers overnight is an art. Some villagers use hot stones, heated during the day, placed under bedding to radiate heat slowly. A mainstream historical fact is that this method, combined with layered textiles, could effectively stave off the worst of the night chill. The heat is subtle but constant, and you marvel at the ingenuity required to survive without abundant wood or modern insulation. You pause, sensing how rhythm and routine underpin survival. Meals are prepared in stages, fires banked or reignited according to need, and children learn early to conserve energy. Seasonal routines dictate every action. Scholars still debate how much of winter preparation was inherited cultural knowledge versus adaptive improvisation. You can almost hear the quiet lessons passed down at the fireside, whispered in tones meant to instruct without startling the sleeping, teaching the next generation how to outwit frost without ever saying it aloud. Outside, the wind continues to wail over the village, but inside, small victories over the cold are visible everywhere, curtains drawn tight against drafts, furs layered like armour, coals glowing softly, bodies pressed close in communal warmth. The smell of preserved foods, sometimes spiced to encourage circulation, drifts from the kitchens. A quirky tidbit is that villagers occasionally sprinkled herbs around the hearth, believing it could purify the air or add a subtle warmth. Whether this was superstition or early experimentation with aromatherapy is uncertain, but it contributes to the sensory tapestry of survival. As your eyes adjust to the dim light and the faint shadows dancing along rough walls, you start to understand the resilience embedded in every stone, every fibre, every whispered routine. Historians still argue whether medieval winter survival was more a matter of clever adaptation or stubborn endurance. You feel the weight of centuries in the air, in the careful layering of blankets, in the quiet patience of villagers listening to the night wind and making themselves ready for another cold morning. You breathe in slowly, tasting the mingled scents of wood, straw, and living creatures, letting the scene settle around you like a soft, protective cloak. The night stretches long, yet the village has its rhythms, small movements adjusting a blanket, nudging a child closer, stirring the embers become acts of preservation, subtle negotiations with the cold that demand attention, but also offer reassurance. You trudge back to your imagined path, boots crunching softly, noticing how the spatial arrangement of homes and communal areas seems to echo strategies perfected over generations. Every doorway, every corridor, Every nook is an exercise in heat retention, a silent testament to the ingenuity required to survive without firewood, without comfort, without certainty. By now, the chill has receded slightly, the body adjusting to the patterns of warmth and cold. You begin to perceive the village not merely as a collection of houses, but as an organism, each component human, animal, hearth, wall interacting to maintain life through the harshest nights. A mainstream historical fact reminds you that these strategies, layered and repeated, were crucial in limiting frostbite and hypothermia, a quirky tidbit, like smothered embers or moss-insulated beds, feels like a wink from the past, a reminder that humans will always find creative ways to endure. You take one last look at the frozen landscape beyond the doors, noticing the subtle glow of the moon on snow, the way shadows lengthen and retreat. Historians still argue whether villagers ever felt triumph in these small victories, or whether each night was simply endured. Either way, there is a rhythm here, a pulse of survival that you can feel even from your distant vantage point, a lesson in patience, ingenuity, and the quiet resilience of ordinary people facing extraordinary cold. You exhale, letting the scene settle into your mind, ready for the next chapter of this winter tale, knowing that tomorrow will bring more strategies, more ingenuity, more subtle negotiations with frost and shadow, and that the village, in its stubborn beauty, will endure. You step outside again, letting your eyes trace the contours of the stone houses in their quiet, frost-bound serenity. The walls are thick, almost oppressive in their solidity, yet you sense their purpose a defensive embrace against the relentless cold. Small windows, sometimes just slits barely wide enough to see the pale daylight, keep the chill at bay while admitting what little sunlight the winter offers. A mainstream historical fact is that the combination of thick stone and small openings significantly reduced heat loss, though you can't help but wonder if the inhabitants ever dreamed of wider windows or more airy interiors. Historians still argue whether the interior temperature truly stayed warm enough for comfort, or merely slowed the freezing of exposed surfaces. You walk past a home with a roof layered in thatch, noticing how the straw seems almost alive in the wind, trembling and whispering secrets to the sky. Thatched roofs served more than a decorative purpose. They provided insulation against biting gusts. A quirky tidbit is that some villagers layered their roofs like cakes, adding extra straw each year in uneven layers, creating an accidental but effective thermal buffer. The idea that a roof could become thicker over time, a cumulative adaptation to winter, feels almost poetic. A collaboration between humans and the natural materials surrounding them. Inside, the smell of damp straw and old wool greets you. Families cluster on straw mattresses, furs layered upon furs, each body pressed close to the next. The communal sleeping arrangements maximize warmth, and you feel the logic of it as you imagine curling into the shared space. Scholars still debate whether such proximity was primarily practical or socially enforced, whether the closeness of generations and neighbours was a survival strategy or simply the result of limited space. The sensation of bodies radiating heat into one another is undeniable, and it makes you realise that warmth is not just physical but social, a shared human experience. Animals occupy the same spaces, a living part of the village's insulation network. Goats nestled in corners, chickens tucked into straw, even dogs pressed against human legs. A fringe theory suggests that villagers intentionally rotated livestock among households to spread warmth. Though evidence is sparse, regardless, their presence is tangible. Each breath, each twitch of fur, adds a subtle layer of comfort in the frozen interior. You imagine a goat shifting slightly, sending a ripple of heat through the mattress, unnoticed but significant. Layering clothing is another essential tactic. woolen tunics over linen shirts, patched furs over bare limbs, even moss tucked between layers in some households. Historians still argue whether there were formal rules guiding how layers were worn, or whether villagers learned by trial, error, and observation. A quirky tidbit emerges as you notice a small bundle tucked into a corner of the bed, perhaps dried moss or a collection of feathers, acting as an improvised pillow and insulation all at once. The idea that natural materials could be pressed into service for warmth reflects a creative pragmatism that feels both simple and profound. Subterranean spaces like root cellars and storage tunnels offer refuge from the most brutal air. You descend briefly into one, the walls damp but stable, the temperature a constant above freezing yet below comfort. Mainstream historical accounts confirm that these spaces were crucial for preserving food, but scholars still debate whether villagers used them as sleeping quarters or purely for storage. You feel the calm consistency of this environment, the absence of wind, the muffled hush of life above. It is a quiet reminder that survival often depends on the smallest, most overlooked details. You pause at a hearth, where embers glow faintly, their heat radiating slowly into the room. Fires are carefully tended, not blazing as you might expect, but kept alive in a delicate balance. A quirky tidbit is that villagers sometimes banked coals under ash at night, preserving embers for hours, ready to rekindle in the early hours without the labour of finding new fuel. Hot stones placed beneath blankets provide another layer of warmth, a clever and surprisingly effective method to maintain comfort through long nights. Historians still argue about how widespread these practices were, whether only wealthier villagers could afford such small luxuries, or if even the humblest households employed them. Your attention shifts to the strategic placement of rooms. Kitchens are often positioned near sleeping areas so that residual warmth permeates living spaces. Mainstream historical sources note that these layouts reduced the need for additional heating, but scholars still debate whether convenience or careful planning dictated the arrangement. The architecture, practical and unassuming, seems designed to maximize every possible degree of warmth. Even small corridors and hallways funnel heat subtly, though you almost miss it if you're not looking. Bedding and furniture contribute to insulation. Straw-filled mattresses layered with furs and linen blankets, sometimes augmented with feathers or moss, create a microclimate around the sleepers. A fringe idea proposes that villagers use dried feathers deliberately as a heat-retaining layer. Though this practice is only hinted at in records and may have been experimental, you run a hand over the surface, imagining the softness and warmth, the way it moulds around bodies pressed close together. Mainstream historians confirm that this kind of layering significantly improved nighttime comfort, reducing heat loss and making survival in the absence of abundant firewood possible. Outside, the village itself seems to act as a barrier against the wind. Fences, walls, and carefully placed snow drifts form natural windbreaks. Historians still argue how much planning went into positioning these barriers, whether it was instinctual or a conscious strategy passed down through generations. You notice the way the snow collects in certain spots, sculpted by both wind and human guidance, creating pockets of relative calm amidst the storm. Quirky details emerge. Sometimes fences were reinforced with mats or extra branches to enhance protection. Small interventions that show an ongoing negotiation with the environment. You pause near a communal building, larger than individual homes, its walls thick and its roof pitched sharply to shed snow. Villagers sometimes gather here on particularly cold nights, creating a shared heat reservoir. Animals occasionally join these gatherings, reinforcing the collective warmth. Mainstream historical accounts confirm that community shelters were a practical response to extreme conditions, though scholars still debate how frequently these gatherings occurred and who had access. You imagine the low hum of conversation, the soft shuffle of feet on straw, the gentle glow of coals against frost-covered walls. A world alive with small, persistent life. Diet and nutrition play a surprisingly central role in winter survival. High-calorie meals, preserved meats, root vegetables, and warming spices provide more than sustenance. They generate internal heat and energy for maintaining body warmth. A quirky tidbit is that some households kept hot spice porridges ready specifically for nighttime consumption. A small, comforting ritual. Historians still argue whether these meals were available to everyone or reserved for certain members of the household. But the principle is clear: food is more than nutrition. It is a tool of survival. Even as night deepens, small rituals continue, singing, storytelling, or gentle movement helps maintain circulation and morale. Scholars still debate whether these practices were primarily cultural or practical, but you can feel their effect as a reader. Warmth is not only physical but psychological. The faint crackle of coals, the rustle of furs, and the rhythmic murmur of voices create a soft, constant background, an audible affirmation that life persists even under extreme duress. By the time your eyes adjust to the muted light, you start to see the village as a living organism. Walls, roofs, bodies, and animals form a complex network of warmth and protection, each element reinforcing the next. Mainstream historical accounts note that this holistic approach to winter survival was crucial, especially in regions with scarce firewood. A quirky tidbit reminds you that villagers sometimes used old sails, banners, or repurposed fabrics to create additional insulation, evidence of improvisation that underscores human creativity in the face of necessity. You breathe slowly, noticing the mingled sense of straw, furs, cooking, and animals, each layer contributing to an immersive experience. Historians still argue about the precise efficacy of these strategies, whether they merely delayed suffering or actively prevented it. But you feel the rhythm of adaptation, the quiet intelligence woven into everyday survival. Outside, the wind continues to howl, but inside, small victories accumulate, embers glow, blankets are layered, animals huddle, and humans endure. You look toward the snow-covered streets, where faint moonlight reflects off icy surfaces, casting gentle patterns that ripple as if alive. The village has its own pulse, a living testament to the ingenuity, patience, and quiet endurance of generations. You exhale, letting the scene settle around you, aware that tomorrow will bring more layers of ingenuity, more subtle interactions between human and environment, more whispered strategies against the cold. You lift your gaze toward the rooftops, noticing how the thick thatch seems to absorb the muted grey light of the winter sky, softening edges and muffling the wind's keening cries. The texture is uneven, striated with years of repairs, extra straw piled in irregular layers, yet each imperfection contributes to insulation. A mainstream historical fact is that these thick, layered roofs dramatically reduced heat loss, especially in regions where timber was scarce and the cold penetrated stone walls. You step closer and see small tufts of moss tucked into gaps, a subtle but deliberate effort to block drafts. Historians still argue whether the moss was primarily a functional addition or if its use also carried symbolic or superstitious significance, a small ritual of protection against the bitter season. From this vantage point, you notice the way snow clings to the roof, melting and refreezing in tiny rivulets before sliding off in quiet cascades. That movement, though gentle, reflects the village's constant negotiation with winter. The wind rattles at shutters, and inside, households press fabric, moss, or clay into gaps to prevent infiltration. A quirky tidbit is that some villagers layered their thatch in what seems like an accidental design, creating thermal pockets that trapped warmth even when temperatures plunged. You imagine the craft required, the repeated adjustments over years, a subtle architecture shaped by cold, observation, and trial. Inside one house, the smell of damp straw and wool fills your senses, mingling with faint traces of cooking smoke. You notice the rush-strewn floors, each layer pressed down over years of use, providing insulation against the cold stone below. Families huddle together in close quarters, creating microclimates with their shared body heat. Scholars still debate whether this practice was motivated solely by warmth, or whether social cohesion and supervision of children also influenced sleeping arrangements. The rhythm of breathing, the soft rustle of blankets, the occasional movement of an animal tucked near a wall all contribute to a delicate balance of warmth and comfort that seems almost magical in its simplicity. Animals play a critical role in this scene. A dog sprawls near the doorway, fur slightly damp but radiating heat. A goat shifts in its straw bedding, sending subtle warmth through the floor. Some households even allowed chickens to sleep within the home, their tiny bodies adding minuscule but meaningful heat to the immediate environment. A fringe theory suggests that rotating livestock among homes ensured equitable warmth distribution across the village. Though records are sparse, regardless, the animal's presence is palpable, a living extension of the human's strategies. Integrating survival into every heartbeat and twitch of fur or feather, clothing layers further reinforce this delicate network. Wool tunics over linen shirts, furs wrapped around torsos, sometimes patches of moss or extra linen tucked in at critical points. Historians still argue whether layering followed explicit rules or was a product of experimentation and personal experience. You notice a small bundle of dried moss or feathers placed beside a sleeping child, an improvisation that might be functional, decorative, or simply a comfort object. A quirky tidbit emerges in your imagination, perhaps a villager experimented with stuffing moss into the sleeves of a tunic, discovering accidentally that it trapped body heat like a primitive thermal pad. Subterranean spaces add another layer of subtle protection. You duck into a root cellar, and the air is damp but steady, cooler than the room above yet shielded from the sharp bite of wind. These spaces stored vegetables, grains, and sometimes firewood. Mainstream historical sources confirm that root cellars prevented food from freezing solid, but scholars still debate whether villagers ever used them as overnight sleeping quarters or solely for storage. You imagine huddling near a wall, the cool stone absorbing and radiating residual warmth, a quiet but effective refuge from the elements above. Embers and hot stones are quietly heroic, hearths are banked, coals smothered with ash, but enough heat lingers to warm the room slowly. Stones heated during the day are tucked beneath blankets, radiating steady warmth for hours. A quirky tidbit is that villagers sometimes used a combination of ember banking and hot stones to create small, strategic heat zones, almost like an early experiment in energy conservation. Historians still debate how widespread these methods were, or whether they were confined to certain regions or wealthier households. The ingenuity is evident, regardless of scale. You notice how kitchens are deliberately positioned near sleeping quarters. The warmth from cooking slowly spreads into adjoining rooms, a subtle, persistent presence that reduces the need for extra fires. Mainstream historians note that this was an essential strategy in small homes where fuel was limited. Scholars still argue whether the layout was driven by practical necessity, inherited tradition, or an intuitive understanding of heat flow. You run a hand along the stone walls and feel the residual warmth, a faint but reassuring reminder of human adaptation. Bedding and furniture act as both comfort and insulation. Straw mattresses are layered with furs, sometimes augmented with feathers, moss, or extra blankets. A fringe idea proposes that some villagers experimented with feathers deliberately to trap heat. Though evidence is limited, the effect is palpable. Each layer traps warmth, creating a cocoon that allows the human body to survive nights that otherwise would be unforgiving. You settle into the imagined texture, sensing how every fold of fabric, every pressed straw, every patch of fur contributes to survival. Outside, fences and snow drifts form protective barriers, windbreaks, natural and human-made, guide snow into predictable patterns, creating calmer pockets where activity and warmth are more manageable. Historians still argue how intentional these strategies were. Did villagers truly understand the science of snow and wind, or did they rely on instinct and experience? Quirky tidbits hint at creative solutions, like repurposed fabric stretched along fences to trap heat or deflect snow. Subtle interventions that reveal the persistent human desire to manipulate the environment, however slightly, in favour of survival. You glance at a communal building, larger and sturdier than the surrounding homes. Here, villagers gather on the coldest nights, consolidating warmth and company. Animals sometimes join these gatherings, reinforcing the collective heat. Mainstream accounts confirm that these shelters were practical solutions to extreme cold. Yet scholars still debate the frequency and organisation of such events. You imagine the low hum of conversation, occasional laughter, and rhythmic movement across straw-strewn floors, all harmonising into a gentle warmth that seems to seep into the walls themselves. Food and diet sustain more than the body. They generate necessary warmth, high-calorie meals, root vegetables, preserved meats, and warming spices form part of the strategy to maintain internal energy. A quirky tidbit is that some families kept hot, spiced porridges ready at night, a ritual blending sustenance and comfort. Historians still argue whether these meals were evenly distributed or reserved for key family members, but the principle remains: energy fuels warmth, and warmth fuels life. Finally, you notice subtle routines that extend comfort storytelling, singing, gentle movement, and care for the young and elderly. Scholars still debate whether these rituals had a measurable effect on survival, or were primarily cultural expressions of community. The rhythms, however, are undeniable. Every action from tending embers to adjusting blankets contributes to the invisible architecture of winter survival. Even in stillness, life pulses through these strategies, a quiet affirmation that human resilience persists even when the world outside is white, sharp, and relentless. You step quietly across the frost-crusted floor, noticing the way the air seems to thicken around the bodies huddled together. Families cluster on rush-strewn mats, layered with furs and worn blankets, each movement carefully measured to avoid disturbing the fragile warmth. Evidence suggests that shared sleeping arrangements significantly reduced exposure to cold, allowing more people to survive nights when the temperature sank below freezing. You catch the faint scent of wool mingled with straw, a mixture that seems to hold the room together as much as it holds heat. Curiously, the placement of sleeping areas often mirrors the village's hierarchy. Elders and children occupy the centre of the beds, shielded by adults on the periphery, a subtle choreography of protection. Some researchers wonder if these arrangements were consciously designed or evolved naturally over generations as an effective way to preserve warmth. You notice how even small gestures, folding a blanket here, nudging a child closer there, have a cumulative effect. A tactile proof of communal care. Animals are a quiet presence, almost always nearby. Dogs curl around feet, goats press against walls, and chickens cluster in straw corners, each contributing a small but meaningful amount of heat. Oddly enough, some villagers reportedly allowed pigs to sleep near doorways, perhaps appreciating the residual warmth of their bodies, or simply because the livestock needed protection from predators. Scholars continue to question whether animals were primarily a source of heat, or if their presence was more about convenience, security, or companionship. Your attention drifts to clothing, the layers wrapped around limbs and torsos like a patchwork of survival. Wool, linen, and fur combine in pragmatic combinations, sometimes augmented with moss or dried grasses tucked inside tunics for added insulation. Academic opinion is divided on whether layering followed strict rules or relied on individual improvisation. A strange detail emerges as you imagine some villagers may have wrapped moss around their hands or feet, creating makeshift mittens or slippers that trap warmth. An inventive solution born of necessity. Subterranean spaces offer another layer of subtle security. Root cellars and small tunnels dug beneath the floor stabilize temperature, remaining cold but never bitter. Records show these areas were essential for storing food through harsh winters. There's ongoing discussion about whether these spaces doubled as emergency sleeping quarters, offering protection from the worst nights, or if they remained strictly for storage. Either way, stepping into one reveals a calm, muted world, quiet enough to make you appreciate the ingenuity embedded in daily life. You notice the hearth, its embers glowing softly beneath a thin layer of ash. Stones heated during the day are tucked under blankets, radiating steady heat through the night. Interestingly, villagers sometimes combined ember banking with hot stones to maintain small heat pockets for hours. Some researchers have speculated on how standardized these techniques were, whether each household developed them independently, or if knowledge was shared among neighbours. The room feels alive with invisible energy, every element working toward survival. The strategic positioning of kitchens near sleeping quarters is subtle but effective. Warmth from cooking slowly permeates adjoining rooms, extending the reach of a single fire. Evidence suggests that this arrangement was a practical measure in homes where fuel was scarce. Experts have long speculated whether the design emerged from instinct, necessity, or trial and error. You sense the flow of heat moving through walls and floors, unnoticed yet essential. Furniture and bedding contribute significantly to insulation. Straw mattresses, layered furs, and extra blankets create a small, self-contained ecosystem of warmth. Oddly enough, some households reportedly added feathers to mattresses, experimenting with texture and heat retention. Though the practice was not universal, there's uncertainty around how common these improvisations were and whether they reflected wealth, ingenuity, or regional tradition. You imagine pressing down into the soft layers and feeling the gentle embrace of warmth, a small miracle against the surrounding cold. Outside, fences and snowdrifts function as protective shields. The wind bends around walls and barriers, carving pockets of calm where movement is easier and the cold is less biting. Scholars continue to question the degree of intentionality behind these windbreaks. Were villagers simply following instinct and trial? Or was there a deliberate understanding of wind patterns? You notice small adaptations, mats or branches woven into fences, subtle interventions that reveal continuous negotiation with nature. The larger communal buildings are hubs of survival strategy. On nights when the cold becomes unmanageable, villagers gather within these structures, consolidating both warmth and companionship. Animals sometimes join these gatherings, adding their bodies to the collective thermal mass. Evidence indicates that such communal shelters were a key factor in reducing frostbite and hypothermia rates during extreme winters. Some debate persists about how frequently these refuges were used, and whether certain households had priority access. Meals play an integral role beyond mere sustenance. High-calorie foods, preserved meats, root vegetables, and warming spices contribute to internal energy and body heat. Curiously, some villagers kept spiced porridges ready specifically for nighttime consumption, a small ritual that combined nutrition with psychological comfort. Experts have long speculated on whether these practices were widespread or limited to certain social classes. You can imagine the warmth spreading from inside, bolstering bodies and spirit simultaneously. Even the simplest nighttime rituals contribute to survival. Gentle movement, storytelling, and quiet song help maintain circulation and morale. Evidence suggests these activities were both practical and social, fostering cohesion in the coldest months. There is ongoing discussion about the relative importance of physical versus psychological benefits, yet the effect is clear. Warmth is not only a matter of fire and fabric, but also of presence, attention, and care. By now, the village has revealed itself as a cohesive organism, each house, wall, person, and animal contributing to a delicate balance of survival. Records show that these collective strategies were essential to enduring winters with minimal firewood. Interestingly, villagers often repurposed materials like sails, old banners, or spare cloth to reinforce insulation, an example of practical creativity woven into everyday life. Academic opinion remains divided on the prevalence and efficiency of such techniques, yet their existence attests to human adaptability. You breathe in slowly, absorbing the scents and subtle movements that define the village. The wind outside continues to whistle and curl through empty streets, but inside, warmth circulates quietly through human and animal bodies, through layered fabrics, through baked stones and stored embers. Experts have long debated how reliable these methods were in the most extreme conditions, yet the persistent ingenuity, improvisation, and attention to detail create a world that feels both fragile and remarkably resilient. You notice the quiet companionship of animals within the home, their bodies tucked near sleeping villagers, subtly radiating warmth that the human body alone could not produce. Evidence indicates that livestock inside houses, particularly goats and dogs, provided small but meaningful increments of heat, reducing the risk of frostbite on the coldest nights. Some researchers continue to debate whether this practice was primarily for thermal advantage or more a matter of convenience and safety, as animals were also easier to protect from predators indoors. You catch a faint whiff of hay and animal musk mixing with the smoke from the embers, a scent that seems both protective and strangely comforting, anchoring the room in life even as the world outside freezes. Curiously, children and the elderly were often positioned centrally on mattresses or bedding arrangements, surrounded by adults and older siblings. This placement ensured they benefited from the warmth of others and allowed easier supervision throughout the night. Scholars remain uncertain whether this was a consciously applied survival tactic or a natural outcome of family organization. You imagine the tiny breaths of a sleeping infant mingling with the exhalations of adults, a slow rhythm that seems to carry through the walls and floors, generating a subtle, almost imperceptible heat in the air. Layered clothing continues to play an essential role. Wool, linen, and fur are combined in various arrangements, sometimes patched together with scraps or moss to fill gaps, oddly enough. Some villagers even tucked dried grasses or feathers inside tunics or sleeves. Experimenting with natural insulators to combat the cold, experts have long speculated on the extent to which these additions were standard practice versus individual experimentation. The tactile sensation is vivid in your imagination: the scratch of wool, the soft compress of fur, the faint stiffness of moss, all contributing to survival without firewood. Beneath your feet, the floors are thick with rushes and straw. These materials provide not only cushioning but also thermal insulation, trapping air and retaining heat from bodies above. Evidence suggests that layering the floors in this manner could raise the ambient temperature slightly, a subtle but vital comfort during frigid nights. Academic opinion remains divided on how effective this was in the most severe conditions. Though the practice appears to have been widespread, you feel the imagined texture as your hands brush across the surface, noting how every element contributes to warmth, almost invisibly. You pause at a root cellar, stepping down into its muted, earthy interior. The air is damp yet remarkably stable, maintaining a consistent temperature that protects food from freezing, commonly noted. These subterranean spaces were crucial for preserving root vegetables, grains, and sometimes even small barrels of liquids. there is uncertainty about whether villagers occasionally slept in these areas during extreme cold, using the subterranean temperature as a survival measure. Curiously, you notice tiny markings or indentations in the soil and stone, hinting at careful arrangement or perhaps an informal method of creating pockets of insulation within the cellar itself. The hearths are carefully maintained. Embers glow softly beneath a thin layer of ash, providing residual warmth. Hot stones, placed under blankets or near feet, release heat gradually, offering consistent comfort without the constant need for fuel. Some records suggest villagers combined ember banking with these stones, creating microclimates within their homes that lasted through the night. Scholars continue to debate how widespread these strategies were, or whether they were the domain of more affluent households. You feel the imagined heat radiating from the stones, a slow, gentle pulse that contrasts with the bitter air beyond the walls. Kitchen placement within homes is intentional, with cooking areas often adjacent to sleeping quarters. The warmth from simmering stews and baking breads naturally permeates the surrounding rooms. Evidence indicates that this arrangement conserved energy and reduced the need for additional fires in smaller spaces. Experts have long speculated whether the design arose from conscious planning or simply evolved from necessity and convenience. Either way, it contributes subtly but significantly to the overall thermal stability of the household. Furniture and bedding continue to serve dual purposes. Straw-stuffed mattresses layered with furs and extra blankets create both comfort and insulation, while odd additions like repurposed cloth or feathers add further thermal value. Interestingly, some villagers may have experimented with bedding materials, observing which combinations retained heat best over successive nights. Academic discussion remains uncertain about how standardized these practices were, but the evidence of layered ingenuity is undeniable. You glance outside, where fences and snowdrifts form protective corridors around homes. These windbreaks guide snow and reduce chilling gusts, creating micro-environments where movement and activity are slightly less punishing. Scholars continue to question whether villagers deliberately manipulated snow and wind patterns, or if these arrangements emerged over time through trial and error. Oddly enough, small pieces of fabric or branches woven into fences appear to have been used to further block drafts, suggesting an ongoing, low-key negotiation with the elements. Larger communal buildings offer another layer of strategy. On particularly cold nights, villagers gather inside, pooling bodies, fires, and small animals to maximize warmth. Evidence indicates that such spaces were critical in preventing frostbite during extreme conditions. There is uncertainty surrounding how frequently these communal shelters were used and which families had priority access. You imagine the soft murmur of voices, movement across straw-laden floors, and the faint glow of embers, creating an environment that seems to breathe warmth as a collective effort rather than a single household's endeavour. Food continues to act as a source of both nutrition and warmth. High-calorie meals and warming spices stimulate the body, supporting circulation and energy maintenance. Interestingly, some households kept hot porridges or spiced teas ready for night consumption, blending comfort and physiological benefit. Experts debate the prevalence of these practices across social strata, yet they clearly reflect an understanding of the link between diet and heat. You visualize the steam rising from a bowl, carrying not just warmth, but reassurance in the stillness of night. Finally, subtle nighttime rituals maintain morale and circulation. Gentle movement, storytelling, and quiet song help sustain both bodies and spirits. Records show that these acts were integral to survival in prolonged cold spells. Scholars continue to question whether the benefit was primarily psychological or also had measurable physiological effects, but the presence of ritual indicates an intertwined strategy of mind and body. You feel the cumulative effect of these small actions, the careful layering of strategies, the invisible architecture of warmth that allows life to persist despite the frozen world just beyond the walls. You shift your attention to the intricate layering of clothing, each piece serving as both armour and comfort. Woolen tunics lie over coarse linen, patched furs wrap torsos and legs, and in some households, moss or dried grasses are tucked into the folds to trap extra warmth. Records show that layering effectively minimised heat loss, even in spaces where the temperature hovered near freezing. Some researchers wonder if there was an unwritten code dictating how many layers to wear, or if trial and error determined the combinations. The texture is tactile in your imagination, scratchy wool against soft fur, the subtle bulk of moss pressing gently against your skin. Each addition a deliberate buffer against the cold. Curiously, villagers often applied the same principles to gloves, mittens, and socks. Simple innovations such as wrapping cloth or stuffing moss into hand coverings help preserve extremity warmth. Experts have long speculated about the origins of these adaptations. Whether they emerged independently in each village or were shared knowledge passed along with other survival skills. You can almost feel the slow warmth creeping into fingers and toes, a small victory in an otherwise unforgiving environment. Subterranean spaces remain a vital refuge. Root cellars, small tunnels, and partially buried storage rooms maintain stable temperatures, protecting both food and, occasionally, the occupants themselves. Evidence suggests that these spaces were central to winter strategy, though there is ongoing discussion about whether humans regularly sought temporary shelter underground. As you imagine stepping inside, the smell of damp earth and the muted hush of the chamber offer a stark contrast to the wind howling above, a reminder that survival often depends on subtle shifts in environment rather than grand gestures. The hearth continues to claim central importance. Softly glowing embers provide residual heat, while hot stones placed beneath blankets radiate warmth for hours. Oddly enough, some villagers reportedly rotated stones from the fire through the night, a practical yet overlooked method of heat retention. Scholars continue to debate how consistent these techniques were, or whether they were limited to households with experience, wealth, or particular skill. You picture the gradual pulse of warmth, gentle enough not to scorch, persistent enough to stave off frostbite and shivering. Kitchens positioned adjacent to sleeping quarters maximize every bit of thermal advantage. Steam from cooking drifts through doorways, subtly raising the ambient temperature in rooms where residents rest. Commonly noted. This architectural consideration reflects the resourcefulness of villagers facing the scarcity of fuel. Some researchers speculate whether the placement arose from careful planning or simply evolved from habit and observation. Either way, the principle is clear proximity to warmth, even incidental, is a crucial survival tool. Furniture and bedding are equally strategic. Straw mattresses, furs, blankets, and occasionally feathers form a multi-layered thermal system. Interestingly, some households experimented with different materials in combination, discovering by trial what best retained heat. Academic opinion remains divided on how widely these experiments were adopted, but their existence highlights the ingenuity present in even the humblest homes. You imagine lying down, pressing into the pile of layers, feeling the slow, enveloping comfort that might have allowed someone to survive a night otherwise dominated by cold. Outside, snowdrifts and fences form more than visual patterns. They serve as protective corridors against the wind. Evidence suggests villagers observed the behavior of snow and wind, subtly manipulating fences or layering branches to create calm areas around homes. There is uncertainty about the degree of intentionality, whether this knowledge was empirical or intuitive. Oddly enough, pieces of cloth or banners were sometimes woven into fences to further block drafts. A simple improvisation showing the constant negotiation with nature. Large communal buildings provide another survival tactic. During particularly harsh nights, villagers gather together, pooling warmth and using animals to supplement their own bodies. Records indicate these spaces were instrumental in reducing frostbite and preventing exposure-related illness. Scholars continue to question which households had access and how often these spaces were employed. You can imagine the low hum of voices, movement on straw-laden floors, and gentle glow of embers, creating a rhythm of life within the frozen environment. Diet and nutrition underpin winter resilience. High-calorie foods, root vegetables, preserved meats, and warming spices maintain energy levels and body warmth. Interestingly, some families kept hot porridges ready for nighttime consumption, blending physical need with ritual comfort. Experts have long speculated on whether such practices were standard or limited to wealthier households, but their logic is evident. Warmth begins from within. You visualize steam rising from a bowl, carrying both heat and reassurance, a small, sustaining pleasure amid hardship. Nighttime rituals continue to play an understated role. Gentle movement, quiet conversation, and storytelling maintain circulation and morale. Evidence suggests that these actions were as important psychologically as they were physically, helping to preserve both energy and community cohesion. There's ongoing discussion about the balance between practical necessity and cultural expression, but you feel the subtle effects. The room hums with life. Warmth flows through bodies and breath, and small, repeated actions knit together a fragile but enduring system of survival. The village feels alive in its patterns. Each wall, mattress, ember, and human movement contributes to a complex architecture of survival. Records show that these integrated strategies were critical for enduring winters with minimal firewood. Curiously, materials often repurposed for insulation, old sails, banners, or spare cloth highlight the resourcefulness of villagers, adapting whatever was at hand to maintain warmth. Scholars remain divided on the prevalence of these methods, yet their existence reveals the persistent ingenuity required to endure. As you absorb the scene, the wind continues to swirl outside, sharp and unforgiving, but inside, warmth circulates invisibly through bodies, fabrics, and stones. Experts have long debated the effectiveness of these strategies, especially during the most extreme cold, yet the collective effort of careful observation, improvisation, and adaptation produces a resilient environment. You exhale slowly, sensing that life, ingenuity, and subtle care sustain the village through the longest, harshest nights. You trudge through the crisp snow outside, noticing the way the village seems to huddle in on itself, each structure a careful response to wind and frost. Records indicate that villagers used windbreaks made of fences, hedges, and snow piles to guide gusts away from living spaces, creating small microclimates where activity and warmth were easier to maintain. Interestingly, some fences were reinforced with spare cloth or branches, an improvisation that suggests a constant negotiation with the elements, as though every barrier was tested and adapted season by season. Curiously, the placement of livestock often reflects an unspoken thermal strategy. Goats, pigs, and dogs were sometimes brought inside or kept close to walls to radiate heat into sleeping quarters. Scholars continue to question whether this was primarily for warmth, convenience, or protection from predators. But its effect is undeniable. Each animal becomes a living radiator, subtly influencing the comfort of the household. You can almost feel the gentle pulse of warmth radiating from a dog curled near a child's feet, a quiet reinforcement of survival in the cold. Inside, you notice the careful layering of clothing, wool, linen, fur, and sometimes moss or grasses combine to create insulation against the penetrating chill. Archaeological evidence suggests that layering significantly reduced heat loss, especially when combined with careful sleeping arrangements and bedding. Some researchers wonder whether the choice of materials followed local custom, or if villagers experimented independently, learning by trial which combinations held heat best. You imagine tugging an extra layer over your shoulders, the subtle weight and texture forming a protective shield against the freezing air that presses through walls and shutters. The placement of bedrooms and sleeping areas also plays a role. Children and elders are often positioned centrally, adults surrounding them as buffers against cold. Contemporary accounts show that this arrangement improved survival rates, though there's uncertainty about whether it was a deliberate plan or an emergent practice arising from observation over generations. You hear the quiet breathing of those nestled together, the soft shuffle of blankets, and the occasional nudge as someone adjusts a mat, each movement contributing to a slow but persistent circulation of warmth. Subterranean spaces remain vital. Root cellars and small tunnels beneath the houses maintain steady temperatures, protecting stored food and occasionally serving as emergency shelters. Experts remain divided over whether humans regularly slept in these areas or only used them for storage. But the stable environment they provide is clear. Oddly enough, you notice small indentations in the walls and floors, perhaps to create pockets of insulation or to channel the heat from stored stones and coals, a subtle design reflecting centuries of accumulated knowledge. Hearths and embers claim attention as well. Stones heated during the day are tucked under blankets or placed near sleeping individuals, radiating heat slowly through the night. It has been suggested that villagers rotated these stones or banked embers strategically to maintain a steady warmth. The rhythm is deliberate and almost invisible, a quiet orchestration of energy and patience. You sense the pulse of heat spreading through the room, a soft but constant reminder that survival is as much about ingenuity as it is about endurance. Kitchens positioned next to sleeping quarters extend this strategy. Steam and residual warmth from cooking drift into adjacent rooms, supplementing the meagre output of embers and stones, commonly noted. This arrangement reflects practical adaptation rather than luxury, making the most of limited fuel and maximizing comfort for those resting nearby. Scholars continue to debate whether the layout originated from conscious architectural planning or simply evolved from centuries of habit and observation. Furniture and bedding further extend warmth. Straw mattresses, layered with furs and blankets, create insulation that preserves the heat generated by bodies and embers. Interestingly, some households added feathers or repurposed cloth for additional thermal protection. A simple yet effective innovation. There's uncertainty about how widely these techniques were adopted, but the evidence shows a pattern of creative problem-solving aimed at survival rather than aesthetics. You notice the role of diet in maintaining heat. High-calorie foods, preserved meats, and root vegetables provide energy to sustain body warmth, while warming spices help circulation. Curiously, some households prepared hot porridges or teas specifically for nighttime consumption, blending practicality with comfort. Experts have long debated whether these practices were standardized or varied greatly across social classes, but they clearly demonstrate an understanding that internal energy directly supports endurance through the cold. Nighttime rituals, subtle and often overlooked, also maintain survival. Gentle movement, storytelling, and conversation help circulation and keep morale intact. Records indicate that these behaviors were as much about psychological endurance as physical survival. Some researchers wonder whether their benefit was primarily cultural, or if these traditions developed because they tangibly improved heat retention and alertness during long nights. You sense the combined effect of these small actions. The room feels warmer, the presence of community palpable, and the chill outside slightly less forbidding. Finally, you perceive the village as an interconnected system of survival. Every wall, ember, animal, and layer of bedding contributes to a delicate balance of warmth and endurance. Contemporary accounts show that these collective strategies were critical to making it through winters without abundant firewood. Oddly enough, villagers often repurposed whatever materials were at hand: old banners, sails, or extra cloth to reinforce insulation, demonstrating remarkable ingenuity and adaptability. Experts remain divided on the prevalence and efficiency of these methods, but the logic of their existence is undeniable. Survival depended on constant observation, adaptation, and collaboration. You notice how carefully embers are tended within each home. Small fires glow beneath a thin layer of ash, providing a steady but gentle warmth that doesn't require constant attention. Records indicate that villagers learned to manage embers strategically, allowing heat to persist throughout the night without exhausting limited fuel supplies. Interestingly, some households combine this practice with heated stones, placing them near sleeping areas to radiate warmth slowly. Experts have long speculated on how standardized these methods were, but it is clear that even simple embers were central to surviving frigid nights. Curiously, the placement of hot stones beneath blankets or along floors seems almost ritualistic. You can imagine the careful rotation of stones, their heat radiating steadily into sleeping bodies. Scholars continue to question whether this was a widespread practice or more typical in wealthier or experienced households. Either way, it demonstrates a keen understanding of heat retention, an intimate knowledge of how warmth could be stored and deployed without modern tools. The subtle pulse of heat through layers of blankets, furs, and straw is almost imperceptible, yet crucial. You step back and consider the layering of clothing: wool, linen, fur, and sometimes moss or grasses are combined to form a patchwork of insulation. Evidence suggests that villagers adapted clothing strategies to maximize warmth while maintaining mobility. Oddly enough, some villagers reportedly added small scraps of dried moss or feathers inside garments, a makeshift thermal padding that illustrates a playful creativity in responding to harsh conditions. Experts remain divided on how widespread these particular improvisations were, though their presence in accounts hints at experimentation across households. The strategic positioning of sleeping areas continues to play a vital role. Children and the elderly occupy central positions on mattresses, surrounded by adults who act as thermal buffers. Contemporary accounts show that such arrangements were effective in maintaining body temperature and reducing the risk of frostbite. Some researchers have speculated on whether these arrangements arose consciously or evolved naturally over generations, an intuitive adaptation to the environment rather than a formal guideline. You imagine the gentle rhythm of breathing, the soft shuffle of blankets, and the quiet presence of animals pressed nearby, all contributing to a delicate equilibrium. Subterranean spaces such as root cellars provide another layer of defense against the cold. These spaces maintain steady, above freezing temperatures and are crucial for storing food and sometimes for offering temporary refuge. Records indicate that root cellars were essential to survival, though there is ongoing discussion about whether villagers ever used them for sleeping during extreme cold. Interestingly, you notice small indentations in the stone walls, perhaps designed to hold stones or coals, creating localized pockets of warmth within the cellar itself. The kitchen continues to radiate subtle warmth throughout the household. Steam from cooking meals drifts into sleeping areas, raising the ambient temperature slightly but significantly. Evidence suggests that villagers took advantage of these incidental heat sources to conserve fuel and extend comfort during the night. Scholars remain divided over whether this was a deliberate architectural choice or simply a byproduct of proximity and habit. You can almost feel the soft rise of warmth through the floors and walls, a silent and constant reinforcement against the chill. Bedding and furniture form an integrated system of insulation. Straw mattresses, layered furs, blankets, and occasionally feathers create a micro-environment that traps and retains heat. Some have speculated that villagers experimented with different combinations, observing which configurations provided the most effective protection against the cold. Oddly enough, repurposed fabrics like old sails or banners were sometimes layered on top of bedding to enhance insulation, demonstrating an improvisational approach to survival. Experts continue to debate how commonly these innovations were employed, but their existence reveals a deep human creativity in responding to environmental pressures. Outside, fences, hedges, and snowdrifts guide the movement of wind, forming protective corridors around homes. Contemporary accounts show that villagers observed these natural patterns and used them strategically to reduce exposure to chilling gusts. Some researchers wonder if these adjustments were the result of long-term observation or merely instinctual responses to repeated winters. You notice how these simple interventions, subtle as they may be, create calmer spaces for outdoor activity and reduce the energy needed to stay warm while travelling between buildings. Communal buildings remain essential during the harshest nights. Villagers gather together, pooling bodies, animals, and embers to maximise warmth. Evidence indicates that these spaces played a crucial role in preventing frostbite and sustaining life when conditions were most severe. Scholars continue to question how access was determined and how often these refuges were used, but it is clear that collective warmth offered a form of insurance against the extreme cold. You hear the imagined low hum of conversation, the shuffle of feet across straw floors, and the soft crackle of embers, all coalescing into a gentle, reassuring presence. Diet and nighttime rituals also contribute significantly to survival. High-calorie meals, root vegetables, preserved meats, and warming spices provide internal heat and maintain energy. While gentle movements, storytelling, and quiet song support both physical circulation and morale, it has been suggested that these behaviours were as much cultural as practical, yet their contribution to enduring the cold is evident. Curiously, small practices like sipping spiced teas or consuming hot porridges before bed reflect an awareness that warmth is both internal and external, and that comfort can be generated through routine and habit. Finally, you recognise the village as a highly integrated system. Walls, floors, bedding, clothing, animals, embers, and shared rituals all converge to create an environment capable of sustaining life despite minimal fuel. Records show that these strategies were essential for survival during the coldest months. Oddly enough, many solutions emerge from improvisation, using materials at hand feathers, moss, old banners revealing a deep, persistent ingenuity. Experts remain divided over the exact efficacy of each method. Yet the collective outcome is undeniable human endurance, observation, and adaptation formed a web of survival that allowed these villages to thrive in the harshest winters. You move through the village streets as night deepens, noticing the way snow muffles every sound except the crunch of your boots. Records indicate that travel during the coldest nights was carefully planned, with villagers relying on well-trodden paths and subtle markers to navigate safely. Curiously, some families left small caches of supplies along frequently used routes, ensuring that anyone caught unexpectedly in the cold could find nourishment or warmth. Scholars continue to debate how widespread these practices were and whether they reflected formal planning or informal generosity. Inside the homes, embers glow faintly beneath ash, radiating slow, persistent heat. Stones heated during the day are tucked beneath blankets, releasing warmth gradually into the sleeping area. Evidence suggests that this method allowed residents to survive nights with minimal fuel, maintaining body temperature for hours. Some researchers speculate that households with greater experience or access to materials had a distinct advantage. But even modest homes employed similar principles. You imagine the gentle pulse of heat moving through layers of blankets and furs, a silent and steady form of protection. Clothing remains a layered defense against the cold, Wool, linen and fur are combined creatively, and sometimes moss or dried grasses are tucked inside for extra insulation. Oddly enough, there are accounts of villagers wrapping small bundles of moss around hands or feet as makeshift mittens or slippers. A small but ingenious adaptation. Experts remain divided on how widespread these improvisations were, though they demonstrate an understanding of heat retention that goes beyond mere necessity. You can almost feel the subtle warmth radiating through each layer, a quiet triumph against the biting air outside. Animals continue to play an essential role. Dogs, goats, and even pigs are pressed close to walls or beds, providing body heat in addition to companionship. Contemporary accounts show that this practice reduced frostbite and maintained comfort for humans. Though there is ongoing discussion about whether animals were brought inside primarily for warmth or security, you notice the rhythmic breathing of animals mingling with humans, the soft shifts and nudges as each adjust for comfort, creating a living system of shared warmth that feels almost tangible. Subterranean spaces provide further refuge. Root cellars and small tunnels maintain stable temperatures, keeping stored food from freezing and offering occasional shelter for people. It has been suggested that in extreme conditions, villagers may have slept in these spaces, benefiting from their steady microclimate. Curiously, some cellars show signs of intentional design, such as small ledges or stone arrangements to hold hot stones or embers, suggesting an intimate understanding of how to store and radiate heat. Experts have long debated the extent of these innovations, but their existence highlights the creativity inherent in daily survival strategies. Kitchens positioned adjacent to sleeping quarters continue to influence the flow of heat. Steam and residual warmth from cooking drift through doorways, subtly raising the ambient temperature of nearby rooms. Evidence shows that this incidental heat significantly improved comfort in small, poorly insulated homes. Scholars continue to question whether this placement was intentional or an emergent adaptation, but its effect is undeniable. You imagine the gentle diffusion of warmth through the stone walls, a soft counterpoint to the harsh cold pressing from outside. Bedding and furniture form another critical layer of survival. Straw mattresses, furs, blankets, and sometimes feathers combine to create insulation that holds body heat. Oddly enough, villagers often repurposed materials such as old sails or banners to reinforce bedding. A simple, yet effective form of innovation. There's ongoing discussion about how standardized these approaches were, but their presence in historical records underscores the improvisation and resourcefulness required to endure the cold. You feel the imagined texture of these layers, dense yet pliant, forming a protective cocoon against the frost outside. Diet and nutrition also support survival. High-calorie foods, preserved meats, root vegetables, and warming spices provide energy and aid circulation. Curiously, some households prepared hot porridges or spiced teas for nighttime consumption, blending practicality with comfort. Experts remain divided on whether these practices were common or reserved for wealthier families, but they clearly demonstrate an understanding of the connection between energy intake and maintaining warmth. You imagine the steam rising from a bowl, the fragrant aroma providing both heat and reassurance in the stillness of night. Nighttime routines, subtle and consistent, maintain both morale and physiological readiness. Gentle movement, quiet conversation, and storytelling circulate energy and keep spirits alive. Contemporary accounts suggest that these practices were as much about psychological endurance as physical survival. Some researchers speculate that the combined effect of these activities helped villagers stay alert and better able to manage embers, clothing, and bedding during the coldest hours. You feel the quiet rhythm of these small actions, a layered strategy for persistence woven into the fabric of daily life. Finally, the village itself emerges as a system of interdependent survival. Every wall, ember, animal, and layer of clothing contributes to the delicate balance required to endure freezing nights. Records indicate that these collective strategies were crucial for making it through winters with limited fuel. Interestingly, many solutions arose from improvisation, using whatever materials were at hand, from moss and feathers to old fabrics, highlighting human ingenuity. Scholars continue to debate the relative effectiveness of each method, yet the cumulative effect is undeniable. Resilience emerges from observation, adaptation, and shared effort, allowing life to continue even under the harshest conditions. You trudge along the icy path outside the clustered houses, noticing the way each wall and roof seems designed to fend off the wind. Evidence suggests that the thick stone construction, small windows, and thatched roofs provided more insulation than one might expect. The air bites at exposed skin, but the walls radiate a subtle, residual warmth that softens the chill. Curiously, villagers sometimes packed extra moss or straw into roof gaps each winter, creating an accidental but effective thermal buffer that thickened over years. Scholars continue to question whether this was a learned technique or simply the result of incremental repairs accumulating over time. Inside, the houses are alive with the soft rustle of movement. Families huddle together on straw-stuffed mattresses, layered with furs, old cloths, and sometimes feathers. Records indicate that sleeping close together reduced the risk of frostbite and helped conserve energy. Some researchers wonder whether the positioning of adults, children, and the elderly followed a conscious plan or simply evolved naturally from habit. You imagine a child pressed between adults, body heat shared silently in the darkness, the warmth a living network flowing through the household. Animals contribute more than companionship. Dogs curled near feet, goats leaning against walls, and chickens nestled into straw all radiate heat. Oddly enough, pigs were sometimes brought inside near doorways or central rooms, not only for warmth, but for protection against predators. Experts have long speculated whether these practices were widespread or limited to wealthier households, but the effect of shared warmth is undeniable. You can almost feel the subtle circulation of heat as each animal breathes, shifts, and settles into place. A rhythm of survival that blends human and animal bodies. Clothing layers create another line of defense: wool, linen, fur, and occasionally moss or dried grasses combine to trap heat effectively. Archaeological findings reveal that layered clothing significantly reduced heat loss in frigid conditions. Some have speculated that villagers experimented with different combinations to discover which materials held warmth best. Remarkably, small moss or feather inserts acted as improvised insulation, a simple but effective adaptation born from necessity. You sense the subtle difference these small innovations could make when temperatures plummeted. Subterranean spaces, including root cellars and small tunnels, serve as temperature-stable zones. Contemporary accounts show that these spaces were used to store food, yet there is uncertainty whether villagers sometimes used them for temporary refuge. Curiously, some cellars have small ledges or indentations for hot stones or embers, creating localized heat pockets. Experts remain divided on how frequently such methods were employed, but their presence suggests an intimate understanding of thermal management in extreme conditions. The hearth remains a central focus of domestic life. Embers glow softly beneath ash, offering steady warmth without consuming excessive fuel. Evidence suggests that combining ember banking with hot stones maintained heat through the night. Some researchers wonder whether households developed standardized routines for rotating stones and tending embers, or whether each family relied on personal trial and experience. You feel the imagined pulse of heat radiating into the room, slow and constant, a quiet lifeline against the relentless cold. Kitchens are typically positioned near sleeping areas, allowing steam and residual warmth from cooking to drift into adjoining rooms. It is well documented that this incidental heat reduced reliance on additional fuel. Conserving scarce resources. Experts have long speculated whether this architectural arrangement was deliberate or an evolved habit. Yet its effectiveness is clear. You notice the subtle movement of warmth along walls and floors, permeating spaces where residents rest, a soft and pervasive comfort. Bedding and furniture serve a dual purpose, comfort and insulation. Straw mattresses layered with furs and blankets trap heat, while repurposed cloth, sails, or banners provide additional coverage. Some have speculated that villagers tested different configurations, observing which materials retained heat best, oddly enough. A layer of moss between furs was sometimes used, adding both insulation and slight cushioning. Scholars continue to debate the prevalence of these adaptations, but their ingenuity reflects a creative response to a challenging environment. Diet plays an integral role in survival. High-calorie foods, preserved meats, root vegetables, and warming spices sustain energy and support circulation. A little-known fact is that hot porridge or spiced teas were sometimes prepared specifically for nighttime consumption. Blending physiological and psychological comfort, experts remain divided on whether such practices were common across social classes. Yet their logic is evident. Maintaining internal warmth through diet was just as important as layering clothes or bedding. Finally, nighttime rituals reinforce endurance. Gentle movement, quiet conversation, and storytelling stimulate circulation and preserve morale. Evidence suggests these behaviors were vital for both psychological and physical well-being. Some researchers have speculated that ritualized activity reduced the risk of frostbite and helped residents stay alert to changing conditions in the home. You sense the layered effect of these strategies. Each action, however small, contributes to a network of survival that keeps the village functioning even during the harshest nights. You wander through the dimly lit interior of a medieval house, noticing how every detail reflects careful adaptation to winter. It is well documented that families relied on communal sleeping arrangements to retain warmth, huddling closely on layered straw and furs to create a microclimate that protected the most vulnerable members. Curiously, adults often position themselves around children and the elderly, providing both warmth and protection. Scholars continue to question whether this pattern emerged intentionally as a survival strategy or naturally through instinct and habit. Animals remain integral to this domestic ecosystem. Dogs curl at the foot of the bed, goats nestle against walls, and occasionally chickens occupy straw-lined corners. Evidence suggests that bringing livestock indoors during extreme cold improved the thermal efficiency of the home, though experts remain divided on whether warmth or convenience was the primary motivator. Oddly enough, some villagers reportedly rotated livestock among households, allowing heat and resources to be shared more evenly. You can almost feel the invisible contribution of animal bodies to the overall comfort, their presence subtle yet essential. Layered clothing continues to demonstrate ingenuity. Wool, linen, and fur are combined, often patched or reinforced with moss or dried grasses. Contemporary accounts show that layering effectively reduced heat loss and allowed residents to endure sub-zero temperatures. Some researchers speculate whether moss or feather inserts were a widespread practice or limited to particular families experimenting with insulation. Interestingly, these improvised layers often doubled as padding, reducing the discomfort of sleeping on cold, hard floors while preserving warmth. Bedding and furniture are equally strategic. Straw mattresses, layered blankets, furs, and occasionally feathers create a multi-layered barrier against the cold. Records indicate that some households reinforced their beds with repurposed materials like sails or old cloth to enhance insulation. Experts have long speculated about how these materials were sourced and whether every household had equal access to them. Remarkably, Even the most humble homes display evidence of deliberate adaptation and attention to detail in maintaining warmth. Subterranean spaces remain a quiet refuge. Root cellars, tunnels, and small storage chambers maintain steady temperatures and protect stored food from freezing. Evidence suggests that these spaces were sometimes used as emergency sleeping areas during particularly harsh nights. Some researchers wonder if their design included features specifically to maximize warmth, such as niches for hot stones or embers. You imagine the stable, damp air of the cellar, muted sounds, and the subtle heat radiating from stones arranged thoughtfully to provide comfort without requiring fuel. The hearth functions as the heartbeat of the home. Embers glow beneath ash, radiating heat slowly but consistently. It has been suggested that households combined ember, banking with hot stones to sustain warmth for extended periods. Experts continue to debate the consistency of these practices, whether they were common across the region or concentrated among more experienced or wealthier families. You sense the rhythm of this heat: slow, steady, persistent, a quiet but essential factor in surviving long, frigid nights. Kitchens located near sleeping quarters serve as an additional source of incidental warmth. Steam and residual heat from cooking subtly raise the temperature in adjoining rooms. Contemporary accounts show that this simple proximity had measurable effects, reducing the need for multiple fires and conserving scarce fuel. Scholars continue to question whether the layout was intentional or a product of habit over generations. You feel the warmth drifting from kitchen to bedroom, almost like an invisible thread weaving through the home. Diet supports survival in ways both physical and psychological. High-calorie foods, preserved meats, root vegetables, and warming spices maintain energy and circulation. Curiously, hot porridge or spiced teas prepared for nighttime consumption provided comfort in addition to sustenance. Experts have long speculated whether these meals were reserved for particular family members or shared broadly. Regardless, the principle is clear: food serves as both energy and insulation, helping the body endure frigid nights. Nighttime rituals enhance both warmth and morale. Gentle movement, quiet song, and storytelling stimulate circulation and maintain alertness. Evidence shows that these practices were common across villages, offering a subtle but consistent contribution to survival. Some researchers speculate that these rituals reinforced community bonds as well as physical resilience. You can almost hear the soft murmur of voices, the rhythmic motion of bodies adjusting for comfort, the collective heartbeat of families enduring together through the cold hours. Finally, you sense the village as a cohesive, interconnected system. Walls, bedding, clothing, animals, food, and human ingenuity all converge to create an environment capable of sustaining life through extreme cold. Records indicate that these strategies, taken together, were essential to survival when firewood was scarce. Remarkably, many innovations arose from improvisation, using available materials like moss, feathers, and repurposed cloth to bolster insulation. Scholars continue to debate the exact effectiveness of each technique, yet the overall picture is undeniable resilience. Observation and collaboration form the backbone of survival in medieval winters. You step outside into the crisp air again, noticing how the snow reflects the dim moonlight and blankets the village in quiet stillness. Records indicate that villagers carefully planned travel during winter, using well-trodden paths and subtle markers such as bundled straw, displaced stones, or small piles of firewood to guide safe passage. Curiously, some families left small caches along commonly travelled routes, ensuring that anyone caught in sudden weather could find provisions. Experts remain divided on how widespread these caches were, or whether they were limited to particular households with foresight and resources. Inside, the faint glow of embers continues to radiate warmth, and hot stones tucked beneath blankets release their stored heat. Evidence suggests that this combination of ember banking and heated stones allowed residents to maintain a steady temperature throughout the night without burning excessive fuel. Some have speculated that rotating stones or adjusting ash coverings was a skill passed down through generations, a quiet expertise that was essential for endurance. You imagine the subtle pulse of warmth spreading through blankets and mattresses, providing comfort even as the wind whistles through shutters and roof gaps. Layered clothing remains central to survival. Wool, linen, fur, and sometimes moss or grasses are combined to trap heat, creating a flexible armour against the cold. Archaeological findings reveal that layering significantly reduced heat loss, particularly in homes without abundant fuel. Oddly enough, some villagers experimented with wrapping moss or feathers around extremities, creating improvised mittens or slippers that increased comfort. Scholars continue to question whether these innovations were common practice or limited to households with more ingenuity or resources. Animals are ever-present participants in the strategy of warmth. Dogs curl around feet, goats lean against walls, and chickens tuck into straw-filled corners. Contemporary accounts show that the proximity of animals improved thermal efficiency and helped households endure freezing nights. Some researchers have speculated that livestock placement may also have been influenced by security concerns or routine care, not just warmth. You can almost feel the collective body heat circulating subtly, a living network of protection that blends human and animal survival strategies. Bedding and furniture contribute layers of insulation. Straw mattresses, blankets, furs, and repurposed cloths form a complex thermal system. It is well documented that some households added feathers or moss between layers for added insulation and comfort. Experts remain uncertain about the prevalence of these practices, yet their ingenuity highlights a pragmatic approach to extreme conditions. You imagine the tactile experience, the firmness of straw, the soft enveloping warmth of furs, this subtle cushion of moss, all working together to preserve body heat. Subterranean spaces provide another dimension of survival. Root cellars and tunnels maintain steady temperatures and protect stored food from freezing. Records indicate that these areas were crucial, and some households may have used them temporarily for shelter. Curiously, small ledges or indentations within these cellars suggest intentional placement of hot stones or embers to create localized warmth. Scholars continue to debate how regularly this practice was used, though the evidence hints at both creativity and experimentation in maximizing thermal comfort. Kitchens adjacent to sleeping quarters provide incidental warmth. Steam and residual heat drift into nearby rooms, subtly raising the ambient temperature. Contemporary accounts show that this simple architectural choice conserved fuel and increased comfort. Some researchers wonder whether these layouts were planned deliberately or simply evolved through trial and error. You can almost feel the warmth travelling along floors and walls, a gentle, pervasive presence that cushions the night. Diet and nutrition are crucial components of winter survival. High-calorie foods, root vegetables, preserved meats, and warming spices sustain energy and support circulation. Oddly enough, villagers sometimes prepared hot porridge or spiced teas specifically for nighttime consumption, blending practicality with comfort. Experts have long debated whether such rituals were widespread or more localized, yet they clearly reflect an understanding that internal warmth is as important as external heat. Nighttime rituals enhance both warmth and morale, gentle movement, quiet conversation, and storytelling maintain circulation and keep spirits buoyed. Evidence suggests that these behaviors were integral in sustaining both physical and mental resilience. Some have speculated that these practices helped households remain alert, allowing them to monitor embers, bedding, and clothing adjustments throughout the night. You sense the rhythm of the room, the shuffle of blankets, soft breathing, and quiet murmurs creating a shared pulse of warmth. Finally, the village presents itself as an interconnected network of survival. Walls, embers, animals, layered clothing, bedding, diet, and human ingenuity all converge to create a resilient system. It is well documented that these strategies collectively enabled villagers to endure freezing winters with minimal firewood. Interestingly, many solutions arose from improvisation, using moss, feathers, and repurposed cloth to bolster insulation. Experts remain divided on the precise effectiveness of each method, yet the overarching principle is clear observation, adaptation, and collaboration formed the backbone of winter survival in medieval villages. You enter a larger communal building, the kind that villagers use during the harshest nights when the cold seems relentless. Records indicate that gathering together in such spaces helped conserve warmth, as bodies, animals, and embers combined to create a shared microclimate. Curiously, some animals were intentionally brought into these communal areas, not only for their body heat but also as companions to reduce stress during long, freezing nights. Scholars continue to question how access to these buildings was managed and whether some families were prioritized over others. But the benefit of collective warmth is unmistakable. Inside, the smell of damp straw, animal musk, and faint smoke mingles into a strangely comforting scent. Evidence suggests that clustering together allowed villagers to retain heat more effectively than when separated in smaller homes. Some researchers wonder if the specific arrangement of people and animals within the room followed learned patterns, or if it evolved organically through observation and necessity. You notice the gentle rise and fall of bodies, the soft shuffle of movement as blankets are adjusted, and the quiet hum of whispered conversation, all creating a rhythm that helps sustain both body and mind. Layered clothing continues to play a vital role. Wool tunics, linen shirts, furs, and occasionally moss or feathers combine to trap heat, forming a protective shield against the frigid air. Contemporary accounts show that layering allowed people to maintain mobility while staying warm. Oddly enough, some villagers tucked moss or dried grasses into gloves or socks as improvised insulation, a practical solution born of necessity and observation. Experts remain divided on how widespread these techniques were, but their presence highlights the inventive adaptations that defined medieval winter life. Bedding arrangements are equally critical. Straw mattresses, layered blankets, furs, and repurposed fabrics form a complex system of insulation. Evidence suggests that layering these materials carefully could make a tangible difference in retaining body heat. Some have speculated that villagers experimented with different configurations, observing which arrangements retained warmth most effectively. Interestingly, moss or extra straw was sometimes added between layers to improve insulation, a small but deliberate adaptation that reflects continuous problem-solving. Subterranean spaces remain a subtle but significant feature. Root cellars and small tunnels beneath buildings maintain steady temperatures, protecting both food and occasionally providing emergency refuge. Records indicate that these areas were invaluable during extreme cold, though it remains uncertain whether they were used consistently for sleeping or reserved mainly for storage. Some have speculated that the presence of indentations or ledges for hot stones or embers demonstrates careful planning to maximize heat distribution in these spaces. The hearth is central to the flow of warmth. Glowing embers and hot stones provide a slow, steady heat that can last through the night without requiring constant attention. Contemporary accounts show that ember banking and strategic placement of stones were common practices for conserving fuel. Experts have long speculated about the precise methods used, but the effect is clear, a steady warmth that permeates the room, quietly supporting survival. Kitchens positioned near sleeping quarters subtly enhance comfort. Steam from cooking spreads into adjacent rooms, raising the ambient temperature just enough to supplement other sources of heat. Evidence suggests that villagers relied on this incidental warmth to reduce the number of fires they had to maintain. Scholars continue to question whether this positioning was intentional architectural planning or the product of habit, but the effect is undeniable. You can imagine the soft diffusion of heat through walls and floors, a gentle layer of protection against the outside chill. Diet remains a key factor in winter survival. High-calorie foods, root vegetables, preserved meats, and warming spices sustain energy and promote circulation. Remarkably, some households prepared hot porridges or spiced teas specifically for nighttime consumption, blending practical nutrition with psychological comfort. Experts remain divided on the extent to which such meals were standard. Yet the logic is clear. Internal heat from food supports endurance against freezing temperatures. Nighttime routines continue to be integral. Gentle movement, quiet conversation, and storytelling help maintain circulation, morale, and alertness. Contemporary accounts indicate that these behaviours were common across villages and served both practical and cultural purposes. Some have speculated that these activities helped people adjust blankets, monitor embers, and optimize clothing layers, a subtle interplay of survival and ritual. Finally, the village functions as an interconnected system of survival. Every wall, ember, mattress, animal, layer of clothing, meal, and subtle action contributes to a network capable of sustaining life through the coldest winters. Records show that these combined strategies were essential when firewood was scarce. Interestingly, many adaptations arose from the improvisation moss, feathers, repurposed cloth, and hot stones were all used creatively to preserve warmth. Scholars continue to debate the precise efficacy of individual methods, yet the collective ingenuity of the villagers is undeniable, a testament to human adaptability in the harshest conditions. You notice the way families prepare for winter well before the first snow falls, stacking straw, furs, and repurposed cloth in anticipation of the months ahead. It is well documented that seasonal preparation was critical to survival, as limited firewood and harsh weather made improvisation alone insufficient. Curiously, some households even stored extra moss and dried grasses specifically to use as insulation in bedding or clothing during the coldest nights. Scholars continue to question whether these pre-winter routines were uniformly practiced across villages or varied significantly depending on resources and local knowledge. Inside, the warmth of embers radiates softly through the rooms, their glow accentuated by the reflective surfaces of furs and blankets. Evidence suggests that ember banking covering coals with ash to prolong their heat allowed households to maintain a baseline warmth without excessive fuel use. Some researchers have speculated that villagers coordinated ember management with other methods, such as hot stones or layered bedding, creating a multi-layered strategy that required observation and careful attention. You imagine the gentle pulse of heat extending through mattresses and the bodies clustered together, a subtle yet persistent form of survival. Clothing remains a layered fortress against the cold. Wool tunics, linen garments, and furs are combined with improvisations like moss, grasses, or even feathers tucked into folds. Contemporary accounts show that layering provided both mobility and protection against frost, and experts remain divided on whether some of the more unusual adaptations, like moss-lined mittens, were widespread or experimental. Oddly enough, small bundles of dried herbs were sometimes included for both scent and the perception of warmth, revealing a human desire to manipulate both the physical and psychological aspects of comfort. Animals continue to serve as living radiators. Dogs, goats, and chickens are pressed against walls or near sleeping areas, their body heat contributing to a subtle but significant increase in ambient temperature. Evidence suggests that this was a recognized advantage. Though some researchers wonder if convenience or security considerations sometimes outweighed thermal benefit. You can almost feel the gentle, shared warmth circulating silently between humans and animals, a dynamic system that balances energy, protection, and survival. Bedding and furniture extend these strategies further. Straw mattresses layered with blankets, furs, and occasionally feathers create a cushioning and insulating effect. It has been suggested that villagers experimented with different combinations of materials, observing which configurations retained the most warmth. Curiously, items like repurposed sails or banners were sometimes laid over bedding, enhancing insulation and demonstrating inventive reuse of available resources. Scholars continue to debate the prevalence of these practices, yet they reveal a consistent human ingenuity in maximizing comfort under extreme conditions. Subterranean spaces such as root cellars play a quiet but essential role. Temperatures remain stable, protecting both food and, occasionally, people from the worst cold. Contemporary accounts show that these areas were sometimes used for temporary refuge during particularly frigid nights. Some researchers have speculated that features like ledges or indentations were intentionally designed to hold hot stones or embers, providing localized heat within an otherwise cold space. You can feel the contrast between the steady, damp cellar air and the biting frost above. A subtle sanctuary born of practical ingenuity. Kitchens near sleeping quarters continue to provide passive warmth. Steam and residual heat from cooking gradually raise the temperature of adjacent rooms, conserving fuel while enhancing comfort. Evidence suggests that this incidental benefit was well understood, though scholars remain uncertain whether the arrangement was deliberate architectural planning or the result of habit over generations. Oddly enough, some villagers positioned cooking surfaces specifically to maximize heat distribution to nearby sleeping areas, a low-tech but effective adaptation. Diet and nutrition underpin many survival strategies. High-calorie foods, preserved meats, root vegetables, and warming spices not only sustain energy, but actively contribute to body heat. Remarkably, some households prepared hot porridge or spiced teas at night to provide both warmth and reassurance. Experts remain divided on how universally these practices were employed. Though their logic is clear, internal warmth from food was as important as insulation from clothing or bedding. Nighttime routines continue to reinforce survival. Gentle movement, storytelling, and quiet conversation stimulate circulation and maintain morale. Contemporary accounts suggest that these behaviors were common and intentional, balancing practical needs with the cultural importance of communal life. Some researchers speculate that such routines improved the ability to adjust blankets, embers, and clothing layers during the coldest hours. You can sense the rhythm of the room's small, synchronized actions that create a dynamic but invisible system of warmth. Finally, the village operates as a complex, interconnected web of survival strategies. Each wall, ember, bed, animal, and layer of clothing contributes to a resilient system capable of sustaining life through harsh winters. Evidence suggests that these strategies collectively made survival possible even with minimal firewood. Curiously, many solutions arose from improvisation using moss, feathers, repurposed cloth, and hot stones, highlighting the adaptability and creativity of villagers. Scholars continue to debate the relative efficiency of each technique, yet the overall picture is clear observation, collaboration, and persistent ingenuity form the backbone of winter survival. You notice the subtle ways in which the village itself is designed to mitigate the winter cold. Contemporary accounts show that buildings are clustered closely together, reducing wind exposure and creating shared microclimates that allow heat to accumulate between structures. Curiously, Some alleys are intentionally narrow to channel movement and block gusts, while fences and hedges guide snow into predictable drifts that provide natural windbreaks. Scholars continue to question whether this village layout was a deliberate architectural strategy or the result of centuries of trial and error and adaptation to local conditions. Inside, the hearth remains a quiet but essential presence. Glowing embers, banked beneath ash, radiate warmth steadily through the rooms. Evidence suggests that ember banking was a skill passed down through generations, allowing heat to persist for hours without additional fuel. Oddly enough, hot stones were sometimes placed beneath blankets or at the edges of sleeping areas, releasing warmth slowly through the night. Experts have long speculated whether these practices were standardized or developed independently in each household. Yet their effectiveness is clear from accounts of survival in extreme cold. Layered clothing continues to be a primary defense against frostbite. Wool, linen, and fur are combined, occasionally reinforced with moss, dried grasses, or feathers. Records indicate that layering significantly reduced heat loss, while allowing residents to remain mobile. Some researchers speculate that unusual additions, like moss inside mittens or shoes, were more experimental than widespread. You imagine the tactile sensation layers pressing against one another, trapping warmth, forming an invisible shield against the harsh outside air. Animals play an ongoing role in the distribution of heat. Dogs curl near sleeping villagers, goats press against walls, and chickens nestle in straw corners, each contributing small but meaningful increments of warmth. Contemporary accounts indicate that this practice helped maintain comfort for humans and livestock alike. Some experts remain divided on whether the primary purpose was thermal, security-related, or both. You feel the imagined warmth radiating gently from these animals, an often overlooked but critical part of the survival network. Bedding is carefully arranged for maximum insulation. Straw mattresses layered with furs, blankets, and repurposed cloth form a dense barrier against the cold. It is well documented that these layers, sometimes enhanced with moss or feathers, significantly increase sleeping comfort. Remarkably, some households added additional layers each winter, responding to harsher conditions or the age and vulnerability of residents. Scholars continue to debate the prevalence of these adaptations, but the evidence shows a pattern of deliberate and creative problem-solving. Subterranean spaces, including root cellars and small tunnels, offer temperature stability and protection from frost. Records show that these areas were crucial for food preservation and occasionally served as temporary refuges during extreme cold. Some researchers speculate that intentional design features, such as ledges for hot stones, allowed localized heating within these spaces. Oddly enough, these underground chambers often became informal gathering spots, with the combined body heat of several people providing a small but measurable increase in temperature. Kitchens near sleeping quarters provide another passive source of warmth. Steam and residual heat from cooking drift into adjoining rooms, raising ambient temperatures and reducing reliance on additional fires. Evidence suggests that this incidental warmth was both observed and appreciated by villagers. Experts continue to debate whether kitchen placement was consciously intended to distribute heat or simply evolved from habit. Yet its contribution to household comfort is undeniable. Diet supports survival in more ways than one. High-calorie foods, root vegetables, preserved meats, and warming spices maintain body heat and energy. Interestingly, hot porridges or spiced teas were sometimes prepared specifically for nighttime consumption, combining nutrition with comfort. Some researchers speculate that these practices were more common in wealthier households, though even modest homes found ways to include warming foods. You can imagine the gentle rise of steam from a bowl, mingling with the subtle heat of the room, providing reassurance in addition to warmth. Nighttime routines are carefully observed, gentle movement, storytelling, and quiet conversation help maintain circulation and morale. Contemporary accounts show that these practices were integral in creating a sense of community and shared resilience. Some have speculated that the combination of movement and ritualized activity helped villagers monitor embers, bedding, and clothing adjustments, enhancing survival through subtle but deliberate coordination. Finally, the village functions as an integrated system of winter endurance. Every wall, ember, layer of clothing, bedding, animal, and routine contributes to survival. It is well documented that these strategies collectively allowed villagers to endure the harshest months with limited firewood. Remarkably, many innovations arose from improvisation, using moss, feathers, repurposed cloth, and hot stones creatively. Experts remain divided on the precise efficiency of individual techniques, yet the overall outcome is clear observation. Adaptation and collaboration form the foundation of survival through freezing winters. You step softly across the frost-covered village square, noticing how the snow absorbs every sound except for the crunch of your boots and the faint hiss of wind curling round the walls. Records indicate that villagers use snow and wind strategically, letting fences, hedges, and narrow alleys form protective corridors that reduced exposure to chilling gusts. Interestingly, some of these corridors were reinforced with woven branches or spare fabric to further block drafts, showing a subtle, low-tech form of engineering born from necessity. Experts remain divided on whether these adaptations were widely understood as deliberate strategies or evolved through repeated observation and trial. Inside the homes, embers glow faintly beneath ash, radiating gentle warmth that spreads through the sleeping areas. Evidence suggests that ember banking allowed heat to persist for hours without consuming extra fuel, providing a vital thermal foundation during nights of extreme cold. Some researchers wonder if households coordinated ember management with other strategies, like hot stones or layered bedding, to create small, targeted heat zones. You imagine the slow radiating warmth moving through mattresses and bodies huddled together, a silent rhythm that supports both comfort and survival. Clothing continues to demonstrate ingenuity and adaptation. Layers of wool, linen, and fur are combined with improvised insulation, including moss or dried grasses. Contemporary accounts show that layering significantly reduced heat loss while maintaining mobility for indoor tasks. Oddly enough, small inserts of moss or feathers were sometimes placed inside mittens, boots, or sleeves to increase warmth in extremities. Scholars continue to question how common these adaptations were, though their use demonstrates the villagers' ongoing experimentation to optimize comfort in freezing conditions. Animals remain a living part of the village's thermal network. Dogs, goats, and chickens are pressed close to walls or sleeping areas, radiating body heat that subtly warms the surroundings. Evidence shows that the presence of animals enhanced comfort and survival, particularly for children and the elderly, and some researchers speculate that the choice and placement of animals reflected both practical warmth needs and security considerations, creating a dual-purpose arrangement that supported the household. You sense the gentle pulse of heat from these creatures, an often overlooked but essential component of winter survival. Bedding and furniture are arranged carefully to maximize insulation. Straw mattresses layered with blankets, furs, and occasionally feathers form a dense thermal system. Contemporary accounts indicate that villagers sometimes added extra layers each year or adjusted their arrangement in response to harsher winters. Remarkably, old sails, banners, or scraps of cloth were repurposed to reinforce beds, demonstrating practical creativity in the face of scarcity. Experts remain divided on the prevalence of these practices, but they reflect the resourcefulness that underpins everyday endurance. Subterranean spaces continue to provide stable thermal zones, Root cellars and small tunnels maintain consistent temperatures, protecting stored food and occasionally providing temporary shelter. Evidence suggests that some households intentionally use ledges or stone arrangements to hold hot embers or stones, generating localized warmth in these underground areas. Scholars continue to debate how frequently these spaces were used for sleeping versus storage, but their presence demonstrates a layered approach to surviving extreme cold. Kitchens adjacent to sleeping quarters contribute passive warmth. Steam and residual heat from cooking drift into rooms, slightly raising the ambient temperature. Contemporary accounts show that this incidental benefit reduced reliance on additional fires. Some researchers speculate that kitchen placement may have been planned to maximize heat distribution, while others argue it evolved naturally from proximity and convenience. You can almost feel the heat spreading subtly through walls and floors, creating comfort without extra effort. Diet and nutrition are crucial to endurance. High-calorie foods, preserved meats, root vegetables, and warming spices maintain internal energy and support circulation. Oddly enough, households sometimes prepared hot porridge or spiced teas at night, blending practical sustenance with comfort. Experts have long speculated on whether these rituals were widespread or limited, yet their utility in supporting survival is undeniable. You imagine the gentle rise of steam from a bowl, mingling with the faint heat from embers and animals, reinforcing the collective warmth of the household. Nighttime rituals extend beyond comfort, aiding both physical and mental resilience. Gentle stretching, quiet conversation, and storytelling maintain circulation and morale. Contemporary accounts suggest that these practices were common and intentional, blending cultural life with practical survival needs. Some have speculated that such rituals help families monitor fires, bedding, and clothing layers without disturbing sleep. A subtle coordination that improved endurance. You sense the rhythm of life in the room, soft whispers, rustling blankets, and the quiet movement of bodies creating a shared pulse of warmth. Finally, the village itself emerges as a carefully integrated system of survival. Walls, bedding, clothing, embers, animals, diet, and rituals all converge to sustain life through the coldest months. Records indicate that these collective strategies were essential when firewood was scarce. Remarkably, many innovations arose from improvisation, with moss, feathers, repurposed cloth, and hot stones creatively employed to maintain warmth. Scholars continue to debate the precise effectiveness of individual techniques. Yet the overall outcome is clear observation, adaptation, and cooperation form the backbone of winter survival in medieval villages. You trudge slowly along the snow-covered path toward a cluster of homes, noticing the way wind curls around walls and piles of drifted snow form natural barriers. Evidence suggests that villagers strategically used fences, hedges, and even snow mounds to create calmer zones, reducing the chilling impact of gusts on daily activity. Curiously, some fences were reinforced with branches or scraps of cloth, forming improvised windbreaks that also helped to preserve warmth inside nearby rooms. Experts remain divided on whether these modifications were intentional adaptations or simply the result of trial and error. Yet their presence indicates a continual negotiation with the elements. Inside, the faint warmth of embers glows beneath ash, radiating through the layered bedding and furs. Contemporary accounts show that ember banking was a critical technique for maintaining heat overnight, particularly in households with minimal firewood. Oddly enough, villagers sometimes combined embers with heated stones, placing them beneath blankets or near sleeping individuals to generate a slow, steady heat. Some researchers speculate that these combined methods were learned through observation and passed down from generation to generation, forming a subtle but effective tradition of thermal management. Layered clothing continues to form a vital defense. Wool tunics, linen garments, and furs are arranged carefully, sometimes reinforced with moss or dried grasses. Records indicate that layering allowed people to conserve energy while performing small tasks indoors. Curiously, small moss or feather inserts were sometimes used in mittens, boots, or even sleeves to protect extremities from frost. Scholars continue to question how widespread these improvisations were, though their existence demonstrates an ongoing search for comfort in challenging conditions. Animals remain an essential part of domestic warmth. Dogs curl near the feet of sleeping villagers, goats press against walls, and chickens nestle into straw, contributing heat in subtle increments. Evidence suggests that this practice was widely appreciated for both thermal benefit and companionship. Some researchers wonder whether the placement of animals was driven more by convenience or by an understanding of their role in heat distribution. But the effect on overall comfort is unmistakable. You can almost feel the invisible circulation of warmth shared between humans and animals. Bedding and furniture are meticulously arranged to maximize insulation. Straw mattresses, layered blankets, furs, and repurposed cloth create a dense thermal barrier. It is well documented that households sometimes adjusted bedding configurations or added extra layers each winter to respond to harsher conditions. Oddly enough, moss or extra straw was occasionally placed between layers to enhance insulation, demonstrating creative problem-solving in the face of scarcity. Experts remain divided on how universally these practices were adopted, yet their existence underscores human ingenuity in adapting to the environment. Subterranean spaces continue to offer protection. Root cellars and small tunnels provide stable temperatures for food storage and occasional refuge for humans. Evidence indicates that some households intentionally design these spaces to hold hot stones or embers, creating pockets of localized warmth. Scholars continue to debate whether these areas were routinely used for sleeping or primarily for storage, but their value in moderating extremes of temperature is clear. You sense the quiet, damp air of the cellar as a sanctuary from the relentless cold above. Kitchens adjacent to sleeping quarters provide additional warmth. Steam and residual heat drift through walls, raising the temperature of nearby rooms and reducing reliance on multiple fires. Contemporary accounts suggest that villagers recognize this incidental advantage, though some researchers speculate that proximity may have been influenced more by habit and convenience than by conscious thermal planning. You can feel the subtle diffusion of warmth, a gentle reinforcement of comfort that supports the household through the night. Diet continues to play a key role in sustaining warmth. High-calorie foods, root vegetables, preserved meats, and warming spices maintain energy in circulation. Remarkably, some households prepared hot porridge or spiced teas for nighttime consumption, combining practicality with psychological comfort. Experts remain divided on whether these nighttime meals were a standard practice or reserved for more resourceful households, but their impact on survival is evident. You can almost taste the warmth carried in steam rising from a bowl, mingling with the residual heat of embers and bodies around it. Nighttime routines remain integral to endurance. Gentle movement, quiet conversation, and storytelling help maintain circulation and morale. Records show that these behaviors were common and intentional, blending cultural life with practical survival strategies. Some researchers speculate that these practices helped villagers monitor bedding, clothing, and embers without disturbing sleep, creating a subtle system of continuous care. You sense the rhythm of the room's soft breathing, rustling blankets, and shared warmth forming a protective cocoon against the biting cold outside. Finally, the village emerges as a finely tuned network of survival. Walls, embers, bedding, clothing, animals, diet. And routines converge to create an environment capable of sustaining life through the harshest winters. Evidence suggests that these strategies collectively allowed villages to endure long periods with minimal firewood. Oddly enough, many solutions arose from improvisation, such as moss, feathers, repurposed cloth, and hot stones, highlighting creativity as a critical tool. Scholars continued to debate the efficiency of each method individually, yet the overall result is unmistakable. Observation, collaboration, and adaptability form the foundation of winter survival in medieval villages. You pause for a moment, noticing how the wind shapes the snow into small drifts that act as natural barriers, softening gusts before they reach the homes. Contemporary accounts show that villagers intentionally used fences, hedges, and snow mounds to manage airflow around their houses, reducing exposure to biting cold. Curiously, some of these windbreaks incorporated woven branches or layers of cloth, a subtle form of low-tech engineering that maximized warmth inside. Experts remain divided on whether these designs were intentionally constructed or simply evolved from repeated observation of effective patterns. Inside the homes, the faint warmth of glowing embers reaches through layers of bedding and furs, creating a gentle microclimate that softens the chill of winter nights. Evidence suggests that ember banking, covering coals with ash to extend their heat, was a practiced technique that allowed households to maintain a steady temperature without burning additional fuel. Some researchers speculate that villagers combined ember banking with heated stones or layered bedding to create targeted zones of warmth. A quiet orchestration of survival knowledge passed down over generations. You sense the soft pulse of heat extending through mattresses, blankets, and bodies. A subtle but crucial factor in endurance. Layered clothing remains central to human survival. Wool, linen, and fur are combined with improvised insulation such as moss or dried grasses. Records indicate that layering was highly effective in preventing heat loss, while allowing mobility for essential indoor tasks. Oddly enough, small inserts of moss or feathers were sometimes tucked into mittens, boots, or sleeves to protect extremities from frost. Scholars continue to question how commonly such improvisations were used, though their presence illustrates ongoing creativity and experimentation. Animals contribute meaningfully to household warmth. Dogs, goats, and chickens are placed near walls or sleeping areas, radiating subtle heat. Evidence suggests that proximity to animals enhanced comfort and endurance, particularly for children and the elderly. Some researchers speculate that animal placement served dual purposes, combining thermal benefit with security, though the precise reasoning remains uncertain. You can almost feel the invisible network of warmth flowing quietly between humans and animals, a living system that bolsters survival without conscious effort. Bedding and furniture form carefully arranged layers of insulation. Straw mattresses, blankets, furs, and repurposed cloth create a dense thermal barrier. Contemporary accounts show that households adjusted layers each winter or experimented with different configurations to optimize warmth. Interestingly, moss or extra straw was sometimes added between layers to improve heat retention, a small innovation that demonstrates practical ingenuity. Experts remain divided on how widespread these adaptations were, but their presence highlights the resourcefulness of medieval villagers facing extreme conditions. Subterranean spaces, including root cellars and small tunnels, provide stable temperature zones. Evidence indicates that these areas were crucial for storing food and occasionally served as emergency refuges. Some have speculated that ledges or indentations were intentionally designed to hold hot stones or embers, creating localized warmth. Scholars continue to debate the frequency and purpose of sleeping in these spaces, yet their thermal stability remains clear. You feel the quiet, damp air of the cellar as a subtle sanctuary against the harsh environment outside. Kitchens placed adjacent to sleeping areas provide additional passive warmth, steam and residual heat from cooking drift into adjoining rooms, raising ambient temperatures slightly. Records indicate that villagers recognized this benefit, though some researchers wonder whether kitchen placement was a deliberate strategy or simply evolved from habit. You can almost sense the gentle movement of warmth through walls and floors, an invisible layer of comfort reinforcing other survival measures. Diet plays an ongoing role in maintaining energy and warmth. High-calorie foods, root vegetables, preserved meats, and warming spices sustain the body through frigid nights. Curiously, some households prepared hot porridge or spiced teas for nighttime consumption, blending nutrition with comfort. Experts remain divided on the prevalence of these practices, but the logic is evident. Maintaining internal heat through food was as important as external insulation. You imagine the comforting steam rising from a bowl, mingling with the residual heat in the room. Nighttime routines continue to enhance survival, gentle movements, soft conversation, and storytelling maintain circulation and morale. Contemporary accounts indicate that these practices were widely observed, blending cultural life with practical survival needs. Some researchers speculate that such routines helped villagers monitor bedding, clothing, and embers without disturbing others, creating a subtle, continuous system of thermal management. You feel the rhythm of life in the room's soft whispers, shifting blankets, and shared warmth combining into an enduring network. Finally, the village reveals itself as a highly integrated system of survival. Walls, embers, bedding, clothing, animals, diet, and nightly routines all work together to maintain warmth. It is well documented that these collective strategies allowed villagers to endure long, cold winters with minimal firewood. Remarkably, many adaptations arose from improvisation, with moss, feathers, repurposed cloth, and hot stones creatively applied. Experts continued to debate the efficiency of individual techniques, yet the overall result is undeniable. Observation, adaptation, and collaboration form the backbone of medieval winter survival. You step quietly along a narrow, snow-laden lane, noticing how the crisp air makes every sound sharp yet muted against the surrounding walls. Records indicate that villages were often laid out to reduce exposure to the wind, with homes clustered tightly and alleys designed to channel movement while sheltering residents. Interestingly, small drifts of snow were sometimes allowed to accumulate in particular areas to act as natural insulation for walkways or doorways. Experts remain divided on whether these patterns were deliberate designs or simply evolved from repeated observation over generations. Inside, the warmth of banked embers glows softly beneath ash, radiating through layered bedding and furs. Contemporary accounts show that ember banking allowed heat to persist for hours without consuming extra firewood, a crucial advantage during long winter nights. Some researchers speculate that villagers coordinated ember use with hot stones or strategic bedding arrangements to create concentrated zones of comfort. You can almost feel the subtle pulse of heat travelling through mattresses and blankets, a quiet force that sustains bodies huddled together against the chill. Layered clothing remains a fundamental defence against the cold. Wool, linen, and fur are combined in overlapping arrangements, occasionally augmented with moss or dried grasses for additional insulation. Evidence suggests that layering was effective at preserving heat while allowing necessary movement within the home. Oddly enough, some villagers placed moss or feathers inside mittens, boots, or sleeves to protect extremities. Scholars continue to question how widespread these improvisations were, yet their existence highlights the ingenuity applied to everyday survival. Animals contribute both warmth and companionship. Dogs, goats, and chickens occupy spaces near walls or sleeping areas, their body heat subtly raising ambient temperatures. Records indicate that households recognize the benefits of including animals indoors. though some researchers wonder whether convenience or security played as large a role as warmth in determining placement. You can sense the quiet rhythm of life as bodies and animals adjust slightly throughout the night, circulating heat in small but essential increments. Bedding arrangements continue to maximize insulation. Straw mattresses layered with blankets, furs, and occasionally repurposed cloth form a dense thermal system. Evidence suggests that households experimented with layering configurations to determine which provided the most effective warmth. Curiously, moss or extra straw was sometimes tucked between layers to enhance insulation and comfort. Experts remain divided on how common these adaptations were, yet they demonstrate practical creativity in responding to extreme winter conditions. Subterranean spaces such as root cellars maintain stable temperatures, offering protection for both food and, occasionally, people. Contemporary accounts indicate that some households use these spaces as temporary sleeping areas during severe weather. Some researchers speculate that small ledges or indentations were deliberately constructed to hold hot stones or embers, generating localized heat. The extent of this practice remains unknown, but its presence reflects a sophisticated understanding of thermal management within limited resources. Kitchens positioned near sleeping quarters contribute passive warmth. Steam from cooking rises into adjoining rooms, subtly raising temperatures and conserving fuel. Records show that villagers were aware of this effect, though experts continue to debate whether such arrangements were intentionally designed or simply developed out of convenience. You can almost feel the warmth drifting quietly through walls and floors, a gentle reinforcement of the household's defensive strategy against the cold. Diet supports survival in multiple ways: high-calorie foods, root vegetables, preserved meats, and warming spices maintain energy and circulation. Remarkably, hot porridge or spiced teas prepared for nighttime consumption provided both warmth and comfort. Some researchers wonder whether these rituals were common across villages or limited to households with more resources, but their effectiveness is evident. You imagine the steam rising from a bowl, carrying heat into both body and spirit. Nighttime routines, subtle but deliberate, help sustain endurance. Gentle movement, soft conversation, and storytelling maintain circulation and morale. Evidence suggests these activities were commonly practiced and served both cultural and practical purposes. Experts have long speculated that such routines helped monitor bedding, embers, and clothing layers without disturbing sleep, ensuring steady comfort throughout the night. You can sense the rhythm of these small actions, a quiet pulse of warmth flowing through the room. Finally, the village functions as a living system of survival. Walls, embers, bedding, clothing, animals, diet, and nightly routines converge to sustain life during the coldest months. Records indicate that these collective strategies were essential when firewood was scarce. Oddly enough, many innovations arose from improvisation, including moss, feathers, repurposed cloth, and hot stones. Scholars continue to debate the efficiency of each technique individually, yet the overall effect is undeniable. Observation, adaptation, and cooperation created a robust system that allowed villagers to endure even the harshest winters. You step carefully along a snow-packed street, feeling the crunch of ice beneath your boots and the sharp bite of winter air against your cheeks. Evidence suggests that villagers carefully arranged homes and fences to create sheltered pathways, reducing exposure to wind and conserving body heat during daily movement. Interestingly, some families left small markers such as displaced stones or bundled straw to indicate safe routes, ensuring that even in low visibility, travellers could find their way. Experts remain divided on whether these markers were widely used or limited to particularly organised households, but their presence highlights subtle adaptations to environmental challenges. Inside, the soft glow of embers warms the central room, diffusing through blankets, furs, and layered clothing. Contemporary accounts show that ember banking was a widespread technique, preserving heat for hours without consuming additional fuel. Some researchers speculate that households coordinated ember placement with hot stones or strategically layered bedding to create zones of focused warmth. You can almost feel the gentle pulse of heat through mattresses and bodies, an invisible network that sustains residents through the long night. Layered clothing continues to serve as a primary defense against the cold. Wool tunics, linen shirts, and furs are combined, sometimes reinforced with moss or dried grasses to maximize insulation. Records indicate that careful layering reduced heat loss, while allowing occupants to remain mobile for domestic tasks. Oddly enough, some villagers tucked moss or feathers inside mittens or boots, providing improvised insulation for extremities. Scholars continue to question the prevalence of these innovations. Though their effectiveness in practice is evident, animals remain active participants in winter survival. Dogs, goats, and chickens are positioned near walls or sleeping areas, radiating warmth that subtly enhances comfort. Evidence shows that their presence was appreciated both for heat and companionship. Some researchers speculate that animal placement was also influenced by security concerns, creating dual-purpose arrangements that improved overall household resilience. You sense the quiet circulation of warmth as bodies and animals adjust slightly throughout the night. Bedding and furniture play a vital role in conserving heat. Straw mattresses, blankets, furs, and repurposed cloth create a multi-layered system of insulation. Contemporary accounts suggest that households experimented with different configurations, adjusting layers to maximize warmth and comfort. Remarkably, moss or extra straw was sometimes tucked between layers to enhance insulation further. Experts remain divided on the widespread use of such adaptations, but their presence underscores human ingenuity and adaptability. Subterranean spaces such as root cellars provide additional thermal stability. Evidence suggests that these areas were used not only for food storage but occasionally as emergency sleeping spaces during the harshest nights. Some researchers speculate that ledges or indentations were intentionally created to hold hot stones or embers, producing localized warmth. It is unclear how common this practice was, yet its existence highlights careful observation of environmental dynamics. Kitchens near sleeping quarters continue to provide passive warmth. Steam and residual heat from cooking rise into adjoining rooms, subtly raising ambient temperatures and conserving fuel. Records indicate that villagers were aware of these effects, though experts remain divided on whether proximity was intentional or evolved through habit. You feel the gentle movement of heat along walls and floors, reinforcing the household's comfort in subtle, continuous ways. Diet plays a critical role in maintaining endurance. High-calorie foods, root vegetables, preserved meats, and warming spices provide both energy and internal warmth. Curiously, some households prepared hot porridges or spiced teas specifically for nighttime consumption, blending physical sustenance with psychological reassurance. Experts remain uncertain about the prevalence of these practices, yet their impact on resilience is clear. You can imagine the comforting steam rising from a bowl, mingling with residual warmth from embers and bodies. Nighttime routines continue to enhance both comfort and survival. Gentle stretching, storytelling, and soft conversations circulate energy and maintain morale. Contemporary accounts show that these behaviors were widespread, blending practical needs with cultural traditions. Some researchers speculate that such routines helped families monitor embers, bedding, and clothing without disturbing others, reinforcing the household's thermal stability. You sense the rhythm of the room's subtle movement, whispers, and warmth flowing through the collective body of the household. Finally, the village operates as a living, integrated system. Walls, embers, bedding, clothing, animals, diet, and rituals converged to sustain life through the coldest months. Records indicate that these strategies collectively allowed survival despite minimal firewood. Oddly enough, many solutions emerged from improvisation, including moss, feathers, repurposed cloth, and hot stones. Scholars continue to debate the efficiency of each method, yet the overall effect is undeniable. Observation, adaptation, and collaboration form the backbone of winter endurance in medieval villages. You step through a narrow lane blanketed in snow, noticing how the clustered homes create sheltered pockets where the wind's bite is less severe. Contemporary accounts show that the close arrangement of buildings, along with fences and hedges, helped trap heat and shield residents from cold gusts. Interestingly, villagers sometimes left small piles of straw or stones to mark safe pathways and guide travellers in low visibility conditions. Scholars continue to question whether these markers were a standard practice across villages or limited to households that had experience with extreme winter conditions. Inside, the warmth of embers radiates softly, filling the room without the need for constant tending. Evidence suggests that ember banking was a widely used strategy, allowing heat to persist for hours without consuming extra fuel. Some researchers speculate that households combined ember banking with strategically placed hot stones and layered bedding to create zones of concentrated warmth. You can feel the imagined flow of heat through blankets, mattresses, and bodies, a quiet, almost imperceptible network of survival that maintains comfort despite the bitter cold outside. Layered clothing remains a critical defense against freezing temperatures. Wool, linen, and fur are combined, often reinforced with moss, dried grasses, or feathers. Records indicate that layering was effective at retaining body heat, while allowing residents to move through their homes. Curiously, moss or feathers were sometimes placed inside mittens, boots, or sleeves, a small but clever adaptation that protected extremities. Experts remain divided on how widely such methods were adopted, but their ingenuity highlights the creativity that sustained households through the harshest winters. Animals continue to play a subtle but essential role. Dogs curl near the feet of sleepers, goats press against walls, and chickens tuck themselves into straw-filled corners, radiating heat that gently warms the surrounding space. Evidence shows that proximity to animals improved comfort and survival, particularly for children and the elderly. Some researchers speculate that their placement also served security purposes, creating arrangements that benefited both warmth and protection. You sense the quiet pulse of heat moving through the room, circulating almost invisibly between humans and animals. Bedding and furniture are carefully layered to maximize warmth. Straw mattresses, blankets, furs, and repurposed cloth create dense insulation. Contemporary accounts suggest that villagers experimented with different bedding arrangements, adjusting layers to find the most effective configuration. Remarkably, moss or additional straw was sometimes placed between layers, a simple but deliberate solution for increasing comfort. Experts remain uncertain how widespread this practice was, yet it demonstrates a consistent effort to adapt household resources for survival. Subterranean spaces such as root cellars and small tunnels provide further thermal stability. Records indicate these areas were crucial for storing food and, in some cases, for offering temporary refuge during extreme cold. Some researchers speculate that ledges or indentations were intentionally designed to hold hot stones or embers, generating small localized zones of warmth. The extent of this practice remains unknown, but its presence underscores the villagers' understanding of temperature management and resourcefulness in leveraging space for survival. Kitchens near sleeping quarters provide passive but meaningful warmth. Steam and residual heat from cooking drift into adjoining rooms, subtly raising ambient temperatures and conserving fuel. Evidence suggests that villagers recognized the advantage of this layout, though experts continue to debate whether its placement was deliberate or simply a product of habit. You can feel the warmth spreading along walls and floors, a quiet, constant support for the household during frigid nights. Diet continues to be essential. High-calorie foods, preserved meats, root vegetables, and warming spices provide energy and maintain circulation. Oddly enough, some families prepared hot porridge or spiced teas specifically for nighttime consumption, offering both physical sustenance and psychological comfort. Scholars remain divided on whether these practices were widespread or limited to particular households, but their value in promoting warmth and endurance is evident. You imagine the steam rising from a bowl, mingling with heat radiating from embers and bodies, a subtle but sustaining comfort. Nighttime routines further contribute to survival. Gentle stretching, storytelling, and quiet conversation maintain circulation and morale. Contemporary accounts indicate that these practices were common and intentional, blending practical survival needs with cultural expression. Some researchers speculate that they also served as a method for monitoring bedding, clothing, and embers without disturbing sleep. You feel the rhythm of the room whispers, rustling blankets, and slight movements combining to maintain a shared pulse of warmth. Finally, the village operates as a finely tuned system of endurance. Walls, bedding, clothing, animals, embers, diet, and routines converge to create a resilient environment. Evidence shows that these collective strategies allowed villagers to survive long winters even with minimal firewood. Remarkably, many solutions arose from the improvisation, using moss, feathers, repurposed cloth, and hot stones. Experts continue to debate the effectiveness of individual techniques, yet the overall impact is clear. Observation, adaptation, and collaboration form the foundation of medieval winter survival. You step lightly across a snow-packed lane, noticing how the clustered houses create sheltered pockets that reduce the harsh impact of the wind. Evidence suggests that villagers intentionally arrange buildings and fences to trap heat and protect movement during winter storms. Curiously, some pathways are subtly marked with bundles of straw or small stones, guiding travellers safely through drifting snow. Experts remain divided on whether these markers were standard practice or a localized adaptation. Yet their presence demonstrates practical ingenuity in navigating the environment. Inside, embers glow softly beneath ash, providing a gentle and persistent warmth. Contemporary accounts show that ember banking allowed heat to last for hours without excessive fuel consumption. Some researchers have speculated that villagers coordinated ember placement with hot stones or layered bedding to create small heat zones for maximum comfort. You can almost feel the warmth radiating through blankets and mattresses, a quiet, continuous lifeline during the long, cold nights. Layered clothing remains essential for survival. Wool, linen, and fur are combined strategically, sometimes reinforced with moss, dried grasses, or feathers for added insulation. Records indicate that layering allowed villagers to remain mobile while staying warm indoors, oddly enough. Moss or feathers were sometimes tucked inside mittens, boots, or sleeves to protect extremities, a small but clever adaptation. Scholars continue to question how common these techniques were, yet their presence illustrates ongoing creativity and problem-solving. Animals contribute to the household's warmth. Dogs, goats, and chickens are pressed near walls or sleeping areas, subtly radiating heat. Evidence suggests that their proximity enhanced comfort, particularly for children and the elderly. Some researchers wonder if animal placement was guided more by convenience or security than by warmth. But its effect on overall comfort is undeniable. You sense the invisible circulation of heat moving between humans and animals, a quiet but essential component of survival. Bedding and furniture are arranged to conserve as much warmth as possible. Straw mattresses, blankets, furs, and repurposed cloth form a dense insulating layer. Contemporary accounts indicate that households sometimes added moss or extra straw between layers for improved thermal retention. Remarkably, some families incorporated old sails or banners, creatively repurposing available materials to bolster insulation. Experts remain divided on how widespread these adaptations were, yet their ingenuity is unmistakable. Subterranean spaces provide additional protection. Root cellars and small tunnels maintain stable temperatures, preserving food and occasionally offering temporary refuge for people. Some researchers have speculated that indentations or ledges were deliberately designed to hold hot stones or embers, creating localized warmth. The extent of this practice remains uncertain, but its use underscores an awareness of environmental adaptation and the importance of resource management. Kitchens placed near sleeping quarters contribute passive warmth. Steam from cooking rises into adjoining rooms, subtly raising ambient temperatures and conserving fuel. Evidence shows that villagers recognize this effect, though some researchers debate whether such placement was intentional or evolved naturally through habit. You can almost feel the gentle spread of heat through walls and floors, a quiet reinforcement of comfort throughout the household. Diet plays a crucial role in survival. High-calorie foods, preserved meats, root vegetables, and warming spices sustain energy and promote circulation. Interestingly, some households prepared hot porridge or spiced teas specifically for nighttime consumption, combining nutrition with psychological comfort. Experts remain divided on how common these practices were, yet their utility in maintaining warmth and endurance is clear. Nighttime routines enhance both warmth and morale. Gentle stretching, soft conversation, and storytelling circulate energy and maintain alertness. Contemporary accounts suggest these behaviors were widely practiced, blending cultural traditions with practical survival strategies. Some researchers speculate that such routines helped residents monitor bedding, embers, and clothing layers without disrupting sleep, reinforcing the household's thermal stability. Finally, the village functions as an integrated system of survival. Walls, embers, bedding, clothing, animals, diet, and routines converge to create a resilient environment. Records indicate that these combined strategies allowed villagers to endure the harshest winters even with minimal firewood. Remarkably, many solutions arose from improvisation, including moss, feathers, repurposed cloth, and hot stones. Scholars continue to debate the effectiveness of individual methods, yet the overall impact is clear observation. Adaptation and cooperation form the backbone of winter survival in medieval villages. You trudge quietly through a snow-dusted alley, noticing how the village's clustered homes create small pockets of shelter, softening the impact of winter gusts. Records indicate that the arrangement of buildings, fences, and hedges help to trap heat and shield residents during outdoor movement. Curiously, some pathways were marked with displaced stones or bundles of straw to guide travellers safely through drifting snow and low visibility conditions. Experts remain divided on whether these markers were widely standardized or localized to certain households. Yet their presence reflects an attentive adaptation to environmental challenges. Inside, embers glow softly beneath a thin layer of ash, radiating heat that penetrates through mattresses, blankets, and layers of furs. Evidence suggests that ember banking allowed households to maintain warmth for hours without burning additional firewood. Some researchers have speculated that villagers coordinated embers with strategically placed hot stones or layered bedding to create concentrated zones of comfort. You can feel the imagined warmth slowly moving through mattresses and bodies, forming a subtle, continuous network that sustains life through the coldest nights. Layered clothing continues to serve as a crucial defense. Wool, linen, and fur are combined in overlapping arrangements, sometimes enhanced with moss, dry grasses, or feathers for extra insulation. Contemporary accounts show that layering preserved heat while allowing residents to perform essential tasks indoors. Oddly enough, moss or feathers were occasionally placed inside mittens, boots, or sleeves to protect extremities from frost. Scholars continue to question the frequency of these adaptations, though their effectiveness in practice demonstrates ingenuity and resourcefulness. Animals play a vital role in household warmth. Dogs curl near the feet of sleepers, goats lean against walls, and chickens nestle into straw-filled corners, all contributing subtle body heat. Records indicate that the presence of animals improved comfort and reduced exposure to cold, especially for children and the elderly. Some researchers speculate that placement of animals was influenced as much by security needs as by thermal benefit, but their role in survival is undeniable. You sense the invisible flow of warmth circulating quietly between humans and animals, a living, responsive system of heat distribution. Bedding and furniture are arranged deliberately to maximize insulation. Straw mattresses, blankets, furs, and repurposed cloth form dense, multi-layered barriers against the cold. Evidence suggests that households experimented with bedding arrangements, adjusting layers according to experience or the severity of winter conditions. Remarkably, moss or extra straw was sometimes added to improve heat retention. Experts remain divided on how widespread these practices were, but they highlight the villagers' inventive solutions to environmental challenges. Subterranean spaces like root cellars provide consistent thermal protection. Records show that these areas were vital for storing food and occasionally used as emergency sleeping spaces during extreme cold. Some researchers have speculated that small ledges or indentations were intentionally made to hold hot stones or embers, creating localized zones of warmth. The extent of this practice remains uncertain, but it demonstrates the villagers' practical understanding of heat management. Kitchens located near sleeping quarters provide additional warmth. Steam and residual heat from cooking drift into adjoining rooms, subtly raising temperatures and conserving fuel. Contemporary accounts indicate that villagers recognize this benefit, though some researchers debate whether the placement was intentional or developed through habit. You can almost feel the warmth permeating through walls and floors, quietly supporting household comfort. Diet continues to sustain life. High-calorie foods, preserved meats, root vegetables, and warming spices maintain energy and circulation. Curiously, households sometimes prepared hot porridge or spiced teas specifically for nighttime consumption, blending practical nutrition with psychological reassurance. Experts remain divided on the prevalence of these practices, yet their utility in maintaining warmth and endurance is evident. Nighttime routines reinforce both comfort and survival. Gentle stretching, quiet conversation, and storytelling circulate energy and sustain morale. Records indicate that these practices were widely observed, integrating practical survival with cultural expression. Some researchers speculate that such routines helped residents adjust bedding, clothing, and embers without disrupting sleep, maintaining steady warmth throughout the night. Finally, the village operates as a finely tuned system of endurance. Walls, embers, bedding, clothing, animals, diet, and routines converge to maintain life in the coldest months. Evidence shows that these strategies collectively allowed survival, despite minimal firewood. Remarkably, many solutions arose from improvisation, including moss, feathers, repurposed cloth, and hot stones. Scholars continue to debate the efficiency of individual methods, yet the overall effect is undeniable. Observation, adaptation, and cooperation form the backbone of winter survival in medieval villages. You step along a snow-packed street, feeling the crisp air prick your cheeks and the crunch of ice beneath your boots. Evidence suggests that villagers used the layout of homes, fences, and hedges to create sheltered zones, minimizing the impact of wind and preserving warmth. Interestingly, small markers like bundled straw or displaced stones were sometimes placed along paths to indicate safe routes through drifting snow. Experts remain divided on whether these markers were common practice or limited to particularly experienced households. But their presence demonstrates thoughtful adaptation to the environment. Inside, the soft glow of embers radiates warmth through mattresses, blankets, and layers of furs. Contemporary accounts show that ember banking allowed heat to persist for hours without consuming extra firewood, providing a critical thermal resource during frigid nights. Some researchers speculate that villagers combined embers with strategically positioned hot stones and layered bedding to create zones of concentrated warmth. You can imagine the subtle circulation of heat through blankets and bodies, a quiet, continuous network of survival. Layered clothing continues to serve as a fundamental defense against the cold. Wool, linen, and fur are combined strategically, sometimes enhanced with moss, dried grasses, or feathers for additional insulation. Records indicate that layering preserved heat while allowing residents to perform essential tasks indoors. Oddly enough, moss or feathers were sometimes tucked inside mittens or boots, offering improvised protection for fingers and toes. Scholars continue to question the prevalence of these techniques, yet their effectiveness is evident in historical survival accounts. Animals remain a vital component of warmth. Dogs curl near the feet of sleepers, goats press against walls, and chickens nestle into straw corners, radiating subtle heat. Evidence shows that the presence of animals improved comfort and survival, particularly for children and the elderly. Some researchers speculate that animal placement also serves security purposes, yet the thermal benefit cannot be denied. You can almost feel the invisible flow of warmth circulating between humans and animals, a quiet but essential form of support. Bedding and furniture are arranged to maximize heat retention. Straw mattresses, blankets, furs, and repurposed cloth form dense, layered insulation. Contemporary accounts indicate that households experimented with configurations, adjusting layers according to winter severity and experience. Remarkably, moss or extra straw was sometimes added between layers to enhance warmth. Experts remain divided on how widespread these practices were, but they reveal a consistent focus on practical adaptation and creativity. Subterranean spaces, including root cellars, maintain stable temperatures. Evidence suggests these spaces were essential for food storage and occasionally used as emergency sleeping areas. Some researchers speculate that ledges or indentations were intentionally created to hold hot stones or embers, producing small localized zones of warmth. The extent of this practice remains uncertain, but it demonstrates careful attention to environmental conditions and resource management. Kitchens positioned near sleeping areas contribute additional warmth. Steam and residual heat from cooking drift into adjoining rooms, raising ambient temperature and reducing fuel use. Contemporary accounts show that villagers appreciated this effect, though some researchers debate whether kitchen placement was deliberate or evolved through habit. You can almost sense warmth quietly moving through walls and floors, subtly supporting comfort in every room. Diet continues to sustain both energy and warmth. High-calorie foods, root vegetables, preserved meats, and warming spices maintain circulation and endurance. Curiously, hot porridge or spiced teas were sometimes prepared for nighttime consumption, blending practical nutrition with psychological comfort. Experts remain divided on how universally these practices were employed, yet their effectiveness in promoting warmth is evident. Nighttime routines remain essential. Gentle movement, soft conversation, and storytelling circulate energy and maintain morale. Records indicate these practices were widely observed, serving both practical and cultural purposes. Some researchers speculate that such routines helped monitor bedding, clothing, and embers without disturbing sleep, creating a subtle system of continuous thermal management. You can sense the rhythm of a life in the room's soft whispers, slight movements, and shared warmth forming an invisible network. Finally, the village operates as a coordinated system of survival. Walls, embers, bedding, clothing, animals, diet, and nightly routines all work together to maintain life during the harshest months. Evidence shows that these combined strategies allowed villagers to endure long winters with minimal firewood. Oddly enough, many innovations arose from improvisation, including moss, feathers, repurposed cloth, and hot stones. Scholars continue to debate the efficiency of individual techniques, yet the collective result is clear observation, adaptation, and collaboration form the foundation of winter endurance in medieval villages. You trudge along a narrow lane blanketed with fresh snow, noticing how the clustered homes create natural pockets of shelter from the wind. Records indicate that villagers used the layout of buildings, fences, and hedges to trap heat and reduce exposure during daily movement. Curiously, small markers like stones or bundles of straw were sometimes placed along paths to help travellers navigate safely through drifting snow and low visibility conditions. Experts remain divided on whether these markers were standard across villages or localised to more experienced households. Yet their presence reflects thoughtful adaptation to the environment. Inside, the warmth of embers spreads gently beneath ash, radiating through layers of blankets, furs, and mattresses. Contemporary accounts show that ember banking allowed heat to last for hours without consuming extra fuel, a critical advantage during long winter nights. Some researchers speculate that villagers coordinated ember placement with hot stones or strategic bedding arrangements to create zones of concentrated warmth. You can imagine the subtle movement of heat through blankets and bodies, a quiet, continuous system of comfort that supports survival. Layered clothing continues to provide essential protection. Wool, linen, and fur are combined carefully, sometimes supplemented with moss, dried grasses, or feathers for extra insulation. Evidence suggests that layering preserved warmth while allowing residents to move freely inside their homes, oddly enough. Moss or feathers were occasionally tucked into mittens, boots, or sleeves to insulate extremities, a simple yet effective adaptation. Scholars continue to question the prevalence of these innovations, but their use illustrates creativity born from necessity. Animals remain a quiet source of warmth. Dogs curl near sleeping villagers, goats press against walls, and chickens nestle into straw, subtly radiating heat. Contemporary accounts show that this practice improved comfort and reduced the risk of frostbite, particularly for children and the elderly. Some researchers speculate that animal placement was also influenced by security needs, creating arrangements that served dual purposes. You sense the invisible circulation of warmth between humans and animals, a delicate network supporting survival. Bedding and furniture are carefully layered to maximize heat retention. Straw mattresses, blankets, furs, and repurposed cloth form a dense insulating system. Records indicate that households experimented with configurations, adjusting layer according to winter severity. Remarkably, moss or extra straw was sometimes added between layers, enhancing insulation and comfort. Experts remain uncertain how widely these techniques were adopted, yet their ingenuity demonstrates a deliberate approach to survival. Subterranean spaces like root cellars maintain stable temperatures, offering protection for food and occasional refuge for humans. Some researchers have speculated that ledges or indentations were deliberately designed to hold hot stones or embers, producing localized zones of warmth. The extent of this practice remains uncertain, yet it highlights villagers' practical understanding of thermal management. You can almost feel the damp, steady air of the cellar as a quiet sanctuary from the harsh environment above. Kitchens near sleeping areas provide passive warmth. Steam and residual heat from cooking rise into adjoining rooms, subtly raising temperatures and reducing the need for additional fires. Contemporary accounts show that villagers recognized this benefit, though experts remain divided on whether kitchen placement was intentional or evolved from habit. You can feel the warmth spreading gently through walls and floors, a quiet layer of comfort supporting household life. Diet plays a crucial role in maintaining energy and warmth. High-calorie foods, preserved meats, root vegetables, and warming spices help sustain circulation. Interestingly, some households prepared hot porridge or spiced teas specifically for nighttime consumption, blending nutrition with psychological comfort. Experts remain uncertain about how universally this practice was employed, yet its impact on endurance is clear. You can imagine the comforting steam rising from a bowl, mingling with the warmth radiating from embers and bodies. Nighttime routines reinforce comfort and survival. Gentle movement, quiet conversation, and storytelling maintain circulation and morale. Records indicate these behaviors were widespread, blending practical survival needs with cultural traditions. Some researchers speculate that such routines helped residents monitor bedding, clothing, and embers without disrupting sleep, ensuring consistent warmth throughout the night. You can sense the quiet rhythm of the room whispers, rustling blankets, and subtle movements forming a protective network of heat. Finally, the village operates as an integrated system of endurance. Walls, embers, bedding, clothing, animals, diet, and routines converge to maintain life through harsh winters. Evidence shows that these combined strategies allowed survival even with minimal firewood. Remarkably, many solutions arose from improvisation, including moss, feathers, repurposed cloth, and hot stones. Scholars continue to debate the efficiency of individual techniques, yet the overall effect is undeniable. Observation, adaptation, and collaboration form the foundation of winter survival in medieval villages. You step carefully across a snow-packed street, noticing how the clustered houses and fences create small sheltered pockets where the wind loses its bite. Evidence suggests that villagers strategically used building placement, hedges, and even snow drifts to reduce exposure and conserve warmth during daily activities. Curiously, some households left subtle markers like straw bundles or displaced stones to guide travelers safely through shifting snow. Experts remain divided on whether these indicators were a widespread practice or limited to more experienced families. Yet their presence demonstrates attentive adaptation to environmental challenges. Inside, the soft glow of embers radiates heat through layered bedding and clothing, creating a quiet warmth that suffuses the room. Contemporary accounts show that ember banking allowed households to maintain warmth for hours without consuming extra firewood, a crucial technique during frigid nights. Some researchers speculate that villagers combined embers with hot stones and strategic bedding placement to form concentrated heat zones. You can almost feel the gentle flow of warmth moving through mattresses, blankets, and bodies, a subtle network sustaining life through the coldest hours. Layered clothing continues to serve as a vital defense against frost. Wool, linen, and fur are combined carefully, sometimes supplemented with moss, dried grasses, or feathers for additional insulation. Records indicate that layering preserved heat while allowing mobility for indoor tasks. Oddly enough, moss or feathers were sometimes inserted into mittens or boots, offering improvised protection for extremities. Scholars continue to question the prevalence of these adaptations, yet their presence highlights the ingenuity applied to everyday survival. Animals remain essential contributors to warmth. Dogs curl near the feet of sleepers, goats press against walls, and chickens nestle into straw corners, radiating subtle heat. Evidence suggests that proximity to animals improved comfort and reduced frost exposure, particularly for vulnerable members of the household. Some researchers speculate that animal placement also serves security purposes, creating dual-function arrangements. You sense the quiet circulation of heat, moving almost invisibly through the room, connecting humans and animals in a shared survival system. Bedding and furniture are carefully arranged for insulation. Straw mattresses, blankets, furs, and repurposed cloth form dense, layered barriers. Contemporary accounts indicate that households experimented with arrangements, adjusting layers to optimize warmth. Remarkably, moss or extra straw was sometimes added between layers, enhancing heat retention and cushioning. Experts remain divided on the prevalence of these practices, yet they underscore a deliberate and creative approach to surviving winter. Subterranean spaces provide additional thermal stability. Root cellars and small tunnels maintain steady temperatures, preserving food and occasionally offering emergency refuge. Some researchers have speculated that ledges or indentations were intentionally designed to hold hot stones or embers, generating localized warmth. The extent of this practice remains uncertain, yet demonstrates careful observation of environmental conditions and resourceful use of available space. Kitchens located near sleeping areas offer passive warmth. Steam and residual heat from cooking drift into adjoining rooms, subtly raising temperatures and conserving fuel. Contemporary accounts suggest villagers recognized this effect, though experts debate whether placement was intentional or evolved naturally over generations. You can sense the heat quietly moving through walls and floors, providing a gentle layer of comfort throughout the household. Diet supports survival in multiple ways. High-calorie foods, root vegetables, preserved meats, and warming spices sustain energy and circulation. Interestingly, households sometimes prepared hot porridge or spiced teas specifically for nighttime consumption, combining nutritional value with psychological comfort. Experts remain divided on the extent of these practices, yet their role in maintaining warmth and endurance is clear. You can almost feel the comforting warmth of steam rising from a bowl, blending with the heat radiating from embers and bodies. Nighttime routines continue to maintain both comfort and alertness. Gentle movement, soft conversation, and storytelling help circulate energy and sustain morale. Records show that these practices were widespread, balancing practical survival needs with cultural tradition. Some researchers speculate that such routines helped monitor bedding, clothing, and embers without disturbing others, supporting consistent warmth throughout the night. You can feel the rhythm of the room's soft sounds, subtle shifts, and shared heat creating a protective network. Finally, the village functions as a cohesive system of endurance. Walls, embers, bedding, clothing, animals, diet, and nightly routines all converge to sustain life through the harshest months. Evidence indicates that these combined strategies allowed villagers to survive long winters with minimal firewood. Remarkably, many solutions arose from improvisation, including moss, feathers, repurposed cloth, and hot stones. Scholars continued to debate the efficiency of each method individually. Yet the overall effect is unmistakable. Observation, adaptation, and cooperation formed the foundation of winter survival in medieval villages. You trudge softly along a narrow, snow-covered alley, noticing how the walls of clustered homes create calm pockets where the wind barely reaches. Contemporary accounts show that villagers deliberately arranged buildings, fences, and hedges to conserve warmth and protect movement during harsh winter days. Curiously, some households place small markers like bundles of straw or stones along paths, guiding travellers safely through deep snow and low visibility conditions. Experts remain divided on whether these markers were common across villages or limited to families familiar with severe winters. yet their presence reflects an attentive adaptation to environmental challenges. Inside, the soft glow of embers warms the room, spreading through mattresses, blankets, and layered furs. Evidence suggests that ember banking allowed heat to persist for hours without consuming excessive fuel. Some researchers speculate that villagers coordinated embers with hot stones and layered bedding to create small zones of concentrated warmth. You can almost feel the gentle flow of heat circulating through blankets and bodies, a quiet, continuous network that sustains residents during frigid nights. Layered clothing continues to play a crucial role. Wool, linen, and fur are combined carefully, sometimes enhanced with moss, dried grasses, or feathers for extra insulation. Records indicate that layering allowed people to preserve warmth while maintaining mobility for indoor tasks. Oddly enough, moss or feathers were occasionally placed inside mittens, boots, or sleeves, a clever improvisation to protect extremities from frost. Scholars continue to question how common these adaptations were, yet their effectiveness is clear in historical accounts. Animals contribute subtly but significantly to household warmth. Dogs curl near the feet of sleepers, goats press against walls, and chickens nestle into straw-filled corners, radiating gentle heat. Contemporary accounts show that proximity to animals improved comfort, especially for children and the elderly. Some researchers speculate that their placement also served security purposes, creating dual-function arrangements. You sense the invisible circulation of warmth moving quietly through the room, connecting humans and animals in a shared system of survival. Bedding and furniture are arranged thoughtfully to maximize insulation. Straw mattresses, blankets, furs, and repurposed cloth form layered barriers that trap heat. Records indicate that households experimented with configurations, adjusting layers for maximum warmth. Remarkably, moss or extra straw was sometimes added between layers to enhance heat retention and cushioning. Experts remain uncertain how widespread these practices were, yet their presence demonstrates a deliberate, creative approach to enduring the cold. Subterranean spaces like root cellars provide consistent thermal protection. Evidence suggests these areas were essential for storing food and occasionally used as emergency sleeping areas. Some researchers have speculated that ledges or indentations were deliberately designed to hold hot stones or embers, producing localized warmth. The extent of this practice remains unclear, but it highlights the villagers' careful attention to their environment and resourcefulness. Kitchens positioned near sleeping quarters provide passive warmth. Steam and residual heat from cooking drift into adjoining rooms, subtly raising ambient temperatures and reducing the need for additional fires. Contemporary accounts suggest that villagers appreciated this effect, though experts debate whether the placement was deliberate or evolved through habit. You can feel the warmth quietly moving through walls and floors, an invisible layer of comfort supporting the household. Diet supports survival in multiple ways: high-calorie foods, root vegetables, preserved meats, and warming spices maintain energy and circulation. Interestingly, some households prepared hot porridge or spiced tea specifically for nighttime consumption, blending nutrition with psychological comfort. Experts remain divided on the prevalence of these practices, yet their effectiveness in promoting endurance and warmth is clear. You imagine the comforting steam rising from a bowl, mingling with the heat of embers and bodies in the room. Nighttime routines continue to sustain both comfort and morale. Gentle movement, soft conversation, and storytelling help maintain circulation and alertness. Contemporary accounts show that these practices were widespread, blending cultural and practical survival strategies. Some researchers speculate that such routines allowed households to monitor bedding, clothing, and embers without disturbing sleep. Maintaining steady warmth throughout the night, you sense the rhythm of life in the room, soft whispers, subtle movements, and shared warmth forming an invisible protective network. Finally, the village functions as an integrated system of survival. Walls, embers, bedding, clothing, animals, diet, and nighttime routines converge to sustain life through the harshest months. Evidence indicates that these strategies collectively allowed villagers to endure long winters with minimal firewood. Remarkably, many solutions arose from improvisation, including moss, feathers, repurposed cloth, and hot stones. Scholars continue to debate the efficiency of individual techniques, yet the overall result is clear observation. Adaptation and cooperation form the backbone of winter survival in medieval villages. You step carefully along a snow-draped street, noticing how the clustered homes and fences form sheltered pockets that soften the wind. Records indicate that villagers designed their settlements, whether intentionally or through long experience, to conserve warmth and make movement less treacherous in winter. Interestingly, small markers like bundled straw, sticks, or stones were sometimes left along pathways to help travellers find safe routes when visibility was poor. Some researchers wonder if these markers were universally used or primarily in households familiar with extreme winters. Yet their presence demonstrates a practical adaptation to the environment. Inside, the soft glow of embers radiates heat through layered bedding and clothing. Evidence suggests that ember banking was a critical method for maintaining warmth without consuming excessive firewood. Some have speculated that households coordinated embers with strategically placed hot stones and layered bedding to create concentrated heat zones. You can almost feel the subtle flow of warmth moving through blankets and bodies. A quiet, continuous system sustaining survival during frigid nights. Layered clothing continues to be an essential defense. Wool, linen, and fur are combined, often supplemented with moss, dried grasses, or feathers for added insulation. Contemporary accounts show that layering helped preserve heat while allowing mobility inside the home. Oddly enough, moss or feathers were sometimes tucked into mittens or boots to insulate extremities. Experts remain divided on how widespread these adaptations were, yet they reveal inventive solutions to cold weather challenges. Animals contribute subtly but significantly to household warmth. Dogs curl near the feet of sleepers, goats press against walls, and chickens nestle into straw-filled corners, radiating gentle heat. Evidence shows that their presence enhanced comfort, especially for children and the elderly. Some researchers speculate that animal placement was influenced by security as well as thermal benefit. You sense the quiet circulation of warmth moving through the room, connecting humans and animals in a living network of heat. Bedding and furniture are arranged carefully for maximum insulation. Straw mattresses, blankets, furs, and repurposed cloth form layered barriers that trap warmth. Records indicate that households experimented with arrangements, adjusting layers depending on the severity of the winter. Remarkably, moss or extra straw was sometimes inserted between layers to improve insulation. Experts remain uncertain how widespread these practices were, yet their presence illustrates a practical, creative approach to enduring extreme cold. Subterranean spaces like root cellars provide a stable thermal environment. Contemporary accounts suggest these areas were essential for storing food, and occasionally for temporary sleeping during severe weather. Some researchers speculate that ledges or indentations were intentionally constructed to hold hot stones or embers, generating small, localized zones of warmth. The extent of this practice remains unknown, but it highlights an attentive and resourceful approach to survival. Kitchens positioned near sleeping quarters provide passive warmth. Steam and residual heat from cooking drift into adjacent rooms, raising ambient temperatures slightly and reducing the need for additional fires. Evidence shows that villagers recognized this advantage. Though experts debate whether the placement was deliberate or evolved naturally over time, you can almost feel the gentle spread of heat along walls and floors, quietly supporting comfort throughout the household. Diet continues to play a crucial role. High-calorie foods, root vegetables, preserved meats, and warming spices sustain energy and circulation. Interestingly, households sometimes prepared hot porridge or spiced teas specifically for nighttime consumption, combining nourishment with psychological comfort. Scholars remain divided on the prevalence of these practices, yet their effectiveness in maintaining warmth is clear. You can imagine the comforting steam rising from a bowl, mingling with heat radiating from embers and bodies. Nighttime routines reinforce comfort and survival, gentle movement, soft conversation, and storytelling help circulate energy and maintain morale. Contemporary accounts suggest these activities were widespread, blending practical needs with cultural traditions. Some researchers speculate that such routines allowed monitoring of bedding, clothing, and embers without disturbing others, supporting consistent warmth. You sense the rhythm of life in the room, whispers, shifting blankets, and shared warmth forming an invisible protective network. Finally, the village operates as a coordinated system of survival. Walls, embers, bedding, clothing, animals, diet, and nighttime routines converge to sustain life during the harshest months. Evidence indicates that these strategies collectively allowed villagers to endure long winters with minimal firewood. Remarkably, many solutions arose from improvisation, including moss, feathers, repurposed cloth, and hot stones. Experts continue to debate the efficiency of individual techniques, yet the overall effect is undeniable. Observation, adaptation, and collaboration form the foundation of winter endurance in medieval villages. You trudge carefully along the frozen village streets, noticing how snowdrifts curl around fences and walls, softening the chill of gusting winds. Records indicate that villagers use the clustering of buildings and natural barriers to protect both themselves and their pathways from extreme cold. Curiously, some households place small straw bundles or stones along frequently travelled routes, guiding travellers safely during blizzards or low visibility conditions. Experts remain divided on whether these markers were common across all villages or specific to households experienced in severe winters. Yet their presence demonstrates the attentive observation required for survival. Inside, the gentle warmth of embers spreads throughout the room, permeating mattresses, blankets, and furs. Evidence suggests that ember banking allowed households to maintain steady heat for hours without excessive firewood consumption. Some researchers have speculated that villagers coordinated embers with strategically placed hot stones and layered bedding to create concentrated warmth zones. You can almost feel the slow, subtle circulation of heat through layers of blankets and bodies. A quiet network sustaining the household through long, frigid nights. Layered clothing continues to provide essential protection. Wool, linen, and fur are combined carefully, sometimes supplemented with moss, dried grasses, or feathers for additional insulation. Contemporary accounts show that layering preserved warmth while allowing residents to move freely indoors, oddly enough. Moss or feathers were sometimes inserted into mittens, boots, or sleeves to protect fingers and toes. Scholars continue to question the extent to which these adaptations were common, yet their ingenuity is clear in the context of extreme cold survival. Animals remain integral to warmth. Dogs curl near the feet of sleepers, goats press against walls, and chickens nestle into straw-filled corners, radiating subtle heat. Evidence shows that their presence increased comfort and reduced frost risk, particularly for children and the elderly. Some researchers speculate the placement of animals was influenced as much by security as by thermal needs, but their contribution to survival is undeniable. You sense the invisible flow of warmth circulating quietly between humans and animals, a delicate system supporting life. Bedding and furniture continue to be arranged strategically. Straw mattresses, blankets, furs, and repurposed cloth form layered barriers that trap heat efficiently. Contemporary accounts suggest that households adjusted arrangements depending on winter severity. Remarkably, moss or extra straw was sometimes added between layers to improve insulation and comfort. Experts remain divided on how widely these practices were used, yet they highlight the practical ingenuity of medieval villagers. Subterranean spaces, including root cellars, provide stable thermal zones. Evidence indicates that these areas were vital for food storage and occasionally used for temporary sleeping during the harshest weather. Some researchers speculate that ledges or indentations were intentionally designed to hold hot stones or embers, producing localized warmth. The extent of this practice remains unknown, yet it underscores villagers' resourceful approach to maximizing comfort. Kitchens positioned near sleeping quarters offer passive warmth. Steam and residual heat from cooking drift into adjoining rooms, subtly raising temperatures and conserving fuel. Contemporary accounts indicate that villagers recognize this benefit, though experts debate whether the arrangement was intentional or arose naturally. You can almost feel the heat moving through walls and floors, quietly reinforcing comfort in every corner of the household. Diet continues to support endurance and warmth. High-calorie foods, preserved meats, root vegetables, and warming spices maintain energy and circulation. Interestingly, some families prepared hot porridge or spiced teas specifically for nighttime consumption, blending nutrition with psychological reassurance. Scholars remain divided on the universality of these practices, yet their effect in promoting warmth and survival is clear. You imagine the comforting steam rising from a bowl, mingling with heat from embers and animals. Nighttime routines maintain both morale and circulation, gentle movement, storytelling, and soft conversations circulate energy and provide focus. Records indicate these practices were widely observed. Combining practical survival needs with cultural traditions, some researchers speculate that they also allowed villagers to monitor bedding, clothing, and embers without disturbing sleep, reinforcing steady warmth. You can sense the rhythm of life in the room whispers, shifting blankets, and shared heat forming an invisible network of support. Finally, the village functions as a cohesive system of winter survival. Walls, embers, bedding, clothing, animals, diet, and nightly routines converge to sustain life through the harshest months. Evidence suggests that these combined strategies allowed villagers to endure extreme winters with minimal firewood. Remarkably, many solutions arose from improvisation, including moss, feathers, repurposed cloth, and hot stones. Experts continue to debate the efficiency of individual techniques, yet the overall outcome is undeniable observation. Adaptation and cooperation form the foundation of survival in medieval villages. You step lightly through the snow-covered streets, noticing how the village's clustered homes and fences create calm pockets that soften the harshest gusts. Evidence suggests that villagers deliberately arranged buildings, hedges, and natural barriers to conserve warmth and protect movement during winter months. Curiously, some households left small bundles of straw or marked stones along well-trodden paths to guide travellers safely through drifting snow. Experts remain divided on whether these markers were universally used or limited to families accustomed to severe winters. Yet their presence demonstrates careful observation and adaptive thinking. Inside, the gentle glow of embers spreads warmth throughout the rooms, permeating mattresses, blankets, and layered furs. Contemporary accounts show that ember banking allowed heat to persist for hours without consuming extra firewood, a critical strategy for enduring frigid nights. Some researchers have speculated that villagers coordinated embers with hot stones and layered bedding to form concentrated heat zones. You can almost feel the warmth radiating slowly through layers of blankets and bodies. A quiet, persistent network sustaining the household. Layered clothing remains a central defense against the cold. Wool, linen, and fur are carefully combined, sometimes reinforced with moss, dried grasses, or feathers. Records indicate that layering preserved heat while allowing movement indoors. Oddly enough, moss or feathers were sometimes tucked inside mittens, boots, or sleeves to provide extra protection for extremities. Scholars continue to question how common these adaptations were, yet their ingenuity demonstrates a thoughtful response to extreme winter conditions. Animals continue to play a key role in domestic warmth. Dogs curl near the feet of sleepers, goats press against walls, and chickens nestle into straw-filled corners, radiating subtle heat. Evidence shows that their presence increased comfort and reduced frost risk, especially for children and the elderly. Some researchers speculate that placement of animals also serves security purposes, yet their contribution to survival is clear. You sense the invisible flow of warmth moving quietly between humans and animals, a delicate system supporting life. Bedding and furniture are carefully arranged for maximum insulation. Straw mattresses, blankets, furs, and repurposed cloth form layered barriers that trap heat efficiently. Contemporary accounts indicate that households adjusted configurations according to winter severity. Remarkably, moss or extra straw was sometimes added between layers to enhance comfort. Experts remain divided on the prevalence of these practices, yet their presence highlights practical ingenuity. Subterranean spaces such as root cellars provide stable thermal environments. Evidence indicates that these areas were vital for storing food and occasionally served as emergency sleeping spaces. Some researchers have speculated that ledges or indentations were intentionally constructed to hold hot stones or embers, producing localized warmth. The extent of this practice remains uncertain, but it highlights villagers' resourcefulness in using available space and materials. Kitchens located near sleeping quarters provide passive warmth. Steam and residual heat from cooking drift into adjoining rooms, subtly raising ambient temperatures and conserving fuel. Contemporary accounts show that villagers recognized this benefit, though experts debate whether the arrangement was intentional or evolved over time. You can sense the warmth quietly moving through walls and floors, quietly reinforcing comfort throughout the household. Diet supports survival in multiple ways. High-calorie foods, preserved meats, root vegetables, and warming spices maintain energy and circulation. Interestingly, hot porridge or spiced teas were sometimes prepared for nighttime consumption, blending practical nutrition with psychological reassurance. Scholars remain divided on the prevalence of these practices, yet their value in maintaining warmth is clear. You imagine the comforting steam rising from a bowl, mingling with heat from embers and bodies, a subtle reinforcement of endurance. Nighttime routines continue to sustain both comfort and alertness. Gentle movement, quiet conversation, and storytelling circulate energy and maintain morale. Contemporary accounts indicate that these activities were widespread, combining practical survival needs with cultural traditions. Some researchers speculate that such routines helped households monitor bedding, clothing, and embers without disturbing sleep, supporting steady warmth. You feel the rhythm of life in the room whispers, soft shifts, and shared heat forming an invisible protective network. Finally, the village functions as a living, integrated system of survival. Walls, embers, bedding, clothing, animals, diet, and routines converge to sustain life through the coldest months. Evidence shows that these combined strategies allowed villagers to endure long winters with minimal firewood. Remarkably, many solutions arose from improvisation, including moss, feathers, repurposed cloth, and hot stones. Experts continue to debate the efficiency of individual techniques, yet the overall impact is unmistakable. Observation, adaptation, and collaboration form the backbone of medieval winter survival. Now, the village settles into stillness, and the snow outside muffles every sound. You notice the faint glow of embers fading gently, the soft rustle of blankets, and the quiet rhythm of animals breathing in their straw-lined corners. The chill has not disappeared entirely, but the layered defences of homes, bedding, clothing, and community form a comforting cocoon around every household. There's a gentle hush over the village, a sense that the collective ingenuity and care of generations is holding the cold at bay. You feel the subtle heat of hot stones beneath blankets, the lingering warmth of cooked meals, and the quiet pulse of shared body heat. Each element of survival clothing, embers, animals, and diet has been carefully combined into a network that protects, sustains, and reassures. Even the small markers along snowed-in paths, the careful arrangement of beds, and the tucked-in moss reflect a deep understanding of winter's demands. Slowly, your senses adjust to the quiet, and the village becomes a single organism of warmth, endurance, and subtle motion. The layers of protection are not only practical but comforting, a testament to human creativity and resilience. You notice how small, deliberate actions ripple through daily life, keeping everyone safe and warm without the need for excessive firewood or frantic effort. As you settle into this peaceful rhythm, the cold outside seems distant. The village breathes quietly, a living system of warmth maintained through observation, adaptation, and cooperation. There is reassurance in this continuity, in the knowledge that these practices have kept humans alive through centuries of harsh winters. The night is long, but it passes with steady, gentle endurance, and you feel the calm certainty that life continues, sustained by layers of ingenuity and care. The snow falls softly outside, the embers dim further, and the household rests. Now, you can let your own mind drift, carried by the quiet rhythm of survival, warmth, and quiet perseverance. Sweet dreams,